The first actions of the story take place in a beautiful and luxurious palace, which is located in the Duchy of Labienne. In this house is an infant with blue hair, to whom a maid approached, asking if he was hungry. A kind maid cradled the infant in her arms, telling him that he was very sweet when he didn't want to cry. Watching the girl drink all the milk, the maid suggests that she was very hungry. The maid was lulling the infant to sleep, while the protagonist herself was thinking about the reason she doesn't cry out is because she is obedient. In fact, the heroine in the infant's body has been reborn many times, and she regrets that she is not allowed to eat rice now. The maid asks the protagonist when she will be given a name, but the girl only thought about the fact that this is her third life. The heroine remembers that in her first life she was an unloved child to her father, after which she died in an accident. She was the illegitimate child of a rich man, so even her father did not love her, giving her no affection. However, when everyone thought that the protagonist was of no use to anyone, her father, on the other hand, was worried that she would take his inheritance. Therefore, the heroine was brutally murdered in her first life so that she would not possess her parents' wealth. She was supposed to go to school with a red suitcase, but an unknown person plunged a knife into her body, causing her to die. In her second life, the heroine was the illegitimate child of Manji Pantan. Her eyes were red, and she was no longer crying because of the blood. Manji held her in his arms, telling her that if she was so strong, they would try to survive together. The girl grew gradually, mastering the magic in the world. She wanted to show her skills to her daddy, which made her call him. She thought Manji would be better than her previous father, but he was just working on her to gain a calling among the people. In fact, her second father just wanted to make the heroine the best so that he would not be stigmatized. The second father often beat up the heroine of the story, which made her realize that he kept her alive just for a whim. Also, Manji often asked the heroine with crazy eyes why she was even living if she was so weak. All these things scared the girl. Even more frightening were the words that here she appeared to be of no use to anyone. Her father had chased her, thinking she would ruin his reputation when she tried to escape from him, calling her the daughter of the devil. Manji pursued the heroine, running after her constantly, but he didn't even know it would end there. The protagonist was already standing near the cliff, thinking about the branding of Panton's daughter haunting her. With sad thoughts, the heroine fell off the high cliff while her father himself and his faithful servants looked on. The heroine recalls falling down, realizing that her second life had sadly ended on the cliff. She even felt joy for the horrors were over, but she was reborn again, opening her eyes. The protagonist in the body of an infant was scrutinizing the place around her, which looked more like a barn or a stable. Looking in the other direction, the heroine realized that it was indeed a stable, and she was reborn into the body of a baby again. Taking a better look around, the heroine realized that all this time she had been in the arms of a woman who gave no signs of life. The girl quickly realized that it was most likely her mother, but she does not understand why they are in the stable. Suddenly, the heroine heard strange noises coming from the street. Someone was clearly opening the door to the stable. A man in a cape appeared in the barn, who immediately approached the heroine and her mother, who was lying on the hay. The heroine noticed a sad look on the stranger, also realizing it was a man, but why was he sad? But the girl also quickly realized that most likely this saddened man is her third father. Just because of this word, the protagonist remembered her very first daddy, who was a real monster. In addition to him, the girl remembered the face of Manji, who constantly bullied and beat her. Looking closely at the sad and empty face of her father, the heroine guessed that she was unwanted for the third time. The man with long hair came closer to the heroine and the dead woman, thinking to say something. But he decided not to say anything, holding out his arms to the heroine to take her away from here and from her mother. The girl's third father walked with the infant away from the stable, while the heroine pondered where he was taking her. However, the protagonist's curiosity was quickly interrupted because she was suddenly very sleepy. The infant closed her eyes, pondering the fact that she has not yet fully realized who this man is to her. But the only thing she understands is that the blue-haired man is definitely related to her and her mom. After the girl got to the mansion, a whole month passed. She moved her pen cutely as she thought about it. The heroine was being rocked in her arms while she herself rejoiced for being alive after all. The red-eyed maid held the heroine in her arms, telling her that her father wasn't coming today, but she would be given a name soon. Remembering that man's face, the girl realizes that she has never seen him since that moment, though it doesn't really matter. The girl also remembered her previous fathers, cruel and evil, which made her afraid of the upcoming meeting with the new one. The heroine made a decision to be quiet until she grew up at this time. A maid named Radietta entered the room, calling out to her. The two maids even tripped over each other as they rushed to be the first to see the new baby. A red-haired maid told them to be careful before the heroine realized who they were. A white-haired maid named Radietta asked Perry Hex and Lillian what was happening to them. But the black-haired maid decided to answer first, saying with a smile that the Lord had named the baby. The maid said that the heroine's name was now Blizz von Labian, while the girl herself thought about how very familiar it was to her. The red-haired maid also told Radietta and the heroine that it was getting late and they should go. Looking at the protagonist, the girl said that her name was Perry and she would be serving her from now on. Following Perry, the black-haired girl also introduced herself and said with a smile that her name was Hexa. Also after Hexa introduced herself and Lillian, who promised the heroine that she would definitely introduce her to her sister. But when the girl said that her sister's name was Helena, the heroine in the body of a baby realized where she had heard these names. The heroine of the story remembered that she knew all these names from a novel with the title Loved by All. Because of this, the heroine realized that she was Blizz and Helena was the girl executed for bullying in the novel. But she was executed because of the bullying of her half-sister Blizz, who is the protagonist. Realizing what awaits her, the heroine cried right in front of a surprised and perplexed Radietta. The heroine recalls that in the novel, the Labian family are the villains who were killed by the protagonist. The little girl cried in the maid's arms, realizing that her life was doomed to misfortune. If the heroine could scream, she would have shouted to the whole castle so that at least God would help her in this life. The next day, the morning rays of light were already penetrating the little protagonist's room. The girl was lying in a small crib, waiting for one of the adults to come up to her and offer her something. Radietta was looking at the heroine the whole time, hoping that she would grow up to be a strong and healthy girl. Radietta would mop up the tears on the main character's cheek, telling her that she had to be the best at everything since she was a lady. At one point, Radietta felt the way the protagonist's small hand grasped her index finger. What also surprised the maid was that the little girl started playing with it, showing her smile and happiness. But because of that, Radietta remembered how she had recently asked the Duke why he didn't give the heroine a name. When asked by the Duke why she was asking that, Radietta replied that the name Blizz, which translates to blessing, was strange since she was from the Labian family. However, the Duke of the house replied that he didn't want to hear anything about it, whereupon he lowered his head unhappily. The Duke looked at Radietta and couldn't forget the day he first met her. The aristocrat remembered their first meeting when he was still very young and did not understand how she always knew everything. But the Duke's thoughts were interrupted by the maid herself, who said that if rumors spread, he would be very bad. This made the Duke even more angry. Lightning could even appear around from his anger as he told Radietta to stop. In response, Radietta asked the Duke if he wanted the heroine to become a cheater too, like that certain man. But the angry Duke only pounded the table with all his might, showing his anger. Looking at the maid with eyes mad with anger, the Duke ordered Radietta not to even mention this man. But the maid decided to object, recalling the past and saying that he was the one who brought this child into the house. Radietta's maid's words caused the Duke to fall silent, for he too remembered something from his past. The Duke remembers listening to his pregnant lover's words that he would name his daughter with the name Blizz, which means blessing. The aristocrat still could not forget the smile of his beloved who gave birth to the main character. The Duke also remembered the words of Radietta's maid, who advised him to meet the lady while he was going through the papers. But what struck the Duke more were the maid's words that he should not regret about it later, as he had with Shesa. The novel Loved by All in the story is a fantasy where a girl turns out to be the main character. And this main character falls in love with everyone, because of which the novel is considered a harem novel and has multiple main characters. It is a common story in a novel where everyone loves one girl who has bright red hair and a wide smile. The heroine recalls that in her very first life, she reread this novel many times while in bed. The girl often read this novel with a soda because she really liked the characters and the plot and the story. However, for the main character, it did not mean that she wished to get into this world. It makes the girl feel as if she is crying. The heroine remembers that in her past life she was literally obsessed with this novel, constantly reading it on her phone. The girl also remembers that the lives of the main characters were described there from to and fro, as if they were real people. The heroine imagines herself as an adult and thinks that perhaps she will be able to save herself from bullying. But for now, the protagonist does not want to think about anything, so she decided to just sleep in a small crib. The girl remembers how she looked at her third father with horror. Because of this, she now does not want to be betrayed. But as the heroine lay in the crib and looked out the window, she realized that she didn't want the third daddy to like her intentionally. The protagonist frowned even more when she realized that even more she didn't want her half-sister to like her either. Helena is the older villain in the Labian family. She bullied the protagonist of the novel, and Blizz is her half-sister. When imagining what will happen to her in the future, the heroine realizes that she is like an eyesore. The heroine is already imagining and how the adult Helena mocks her, saying that she is nothing if not adopted. But the heroine also remembers that in the novel, Helena disliked Blizz so much that she told her she had no sister. Blizz remembers that Blizz, that is, she, suffered from her sister's abuse all the time and was sentenced to execution because of it. Clenching her palms into a fist, the disgruntled protagonist asked herself why there was so much trouble around again. The little girl continuing to lie in the crib also thought about the fact that her disappearance and so no one will notice. While the protagonist was thinking that she should save money and leave this house, a maid was already looking at her. This maid turned out to be Radietta, who smiled at the heroine, saying that today she was full of energy. The girl continued to look at Radietta, thinking that she was the most beautiful of the maids, and that she was probably her personal maid. Radietta suddenly told the heroine that most likely her mother was also very quiet as a baby, which surprised the heroine. At this time, other maids were already rushing to the heroine, thanks to which she realized that Radietta was definitely in charge here. But the heroine was distracted from the maids by the white-haired maid herself, who asked the girl if she was hungry. Starting to go somewhere, the main maid told the heroine that the weather today is very good, so they will go out for a walk. The main heroine was already admiring the garden while a crowd of interested maids were already following her and Radietta. Radietta was also carrying the protagonist to some place, saying that she really wanted to introduce her to the Labian family. The girl also decided to confess that she was honored to serve this Herrgzaust, which didn't surprise the protagonist. In the world of the story, there is an empire with a royal family that has dragon blood, and there are also 4 duchies. The first ducal family is Labian, which heals everyone and has a shield on its family crest. The second ducal family is Ed, who handles all poisons and has a skull on his coat of arms. The third ducal family, Gold, which as if blessed by spirits has wings on its coat of arms. And the fourth family is the eternal Asidel, shrouded in a dark veil. Their family crest bears the image of a deer. After hearing this from the maid, the heroine realized that the body she was reborn into must have magical abilities. According to Radietta, she wanted to show the heroine just that, a statue of some hero. The maid and the girl looked at it without taking their eyes off of it, as if it were a true work of art. As the heroine scrutinized the outline of the statue's face, the maid told her that it was the first member of the Labian family. The maid went on to say that he looked a lot like the current duke, while the heroine of the story continued to stare at the statue. Radietta continued to look at the stone statue as if she felt something for it. The statue seemed to look ordinary. Flower petals were flying around it like butterflies. But while the maid was looking at the statue, the heroine in the body of a baby became agitated because she felt something. All the maids quickly turned around because they heard a strange, sly voice behind them. The voice belonged to a dark-haired man who asked the girls if they were blocking his way. But Radietta answered nothing and only ordered Liliana to cover her and the child with a wave of her hand. Then the maids bowed and greeted Heinrich von Ada. The heroine doesn't even realize what is happening. Realizing who stands before her, the girl imagined in her mind a man who holds in his hands a terrible green poison. The protagonist recognizes the man as Heinrich von Ada from the story of the novel, whom she has known for a long time. He's known for getting everything at any cost, showing the greatest cruelty to people. This is also what Helena took advantage of in the novel, making him one of those behind the destruction of the Labian family. But the heroine also wonders what exactly such an evil man is doing here in the Labian mansion. The girl looked at the evil Henry with surprised eyes when he told her that she was actually his niece. The heroine thought about the fact that her mother might be from the Duchy of Ed, and if so, it would be very bad for her. Also, Blizz realizes that this wasn't the case in the original novel, and it would be hard for her if she came from a dark family. The girl continued to listen warily to the adults' conversation, as she still doesn't know how to do anything at this age. Meanwhile, a maid named Radietta was already talking to Henry, saying that he had arrived here unannounced. But in response to this, Henry only frantically asked if his uncle had to warn him of his visit. Henry decided not to scare his subordinates, causing him to gesture with his hand and ordered them to watch their words next time. Afterwards, he pierced the maids with his dark green eyes, saying that in any case, the purpose of his visit had already been fulfilled. In an instant, the protagonist was enveloped in noxious smoke as she listened to Henry's own words about how he was very much like her. The heroine would have continued to listen to her uncle, but she felt something that quickly made her think twice about her health. Radietta's red eyes lit up. She turned the infant away from her, calling out to Heinrich von Ede. She pierced him with red as a jewel, telling him she would not allow such buffoonery again. Heinrich continued to stare at the maid, listening to her say that to him she was a niece, but to them she was a mistress. The villain asked if they didn't respect him, to which the maid replied that they did, but in her opinion, he was already crossing the line. The black-haired guy decided to remain silent, causing him to look away, pondering the maid's words. After that, he turned around, saying that he would go, but they needed to be more careful next time. Henry left as if a poisonous snake had left Radietta with the protagonist, which made it feel lighter. But the heroine did not have time to calm down because she felt the way she began to choke hard. It was as if she had lost her breath. The heroine felt as if there was a snake that began to strangle her. At this point, Blizz remembered that she had felt pain all her life, whether it was when she was ignored or something else. Because of this, she had been lonely for most of her life, though she longed for a family very much. Therefore, the girl hated pain. She gasped as the maid didn't know what to do to help. The little girl sweated through the pain, hoping that Radietta was someone she could trust. Meanwhile, the Duke had a dream where he was lying on a couch thinking that Sheza was Henry's spy who wanted to get rid of him. Because of this, the Duke appeared in front of Sheza, saying that he knew that she was Roxiel von Ed. However, Sheza was not angry at her lover. She lowered her head, saying that she felt sorry for Helios. What surprised Helios even more was that Sheza confessed to him that she truly loved him. Holding back tears, Sheza confessed that she wanted not just to live with him, but to start a family and raise a child. But Helios, who already knew his betrayer was pregnant, asked how he could even trust her if she was lying. An outraged Sheza wanted to say that she wasn't, but at that point Helios no longer wanted to hear or see her. That was the last word before Sheza and Helios parted ways and the Duke threw his lover out of the palace. Several months had passed since that event, and Helios was going through the papers on his desk as usual. But Helios was horrified to read in one letter that Sheza was missing, and even Henry could not find her. With thoughts of finding Sheza with child, Helios took his horse and rode it through the forest. The image of Sheza still lingered in his mind, causing him to constantly ask himself where she was. Fate led Helios to the stables, and then he got off his horse, praying to the Lord that all would be well. He was already opening the heavy gates of the stable, never ceasing to worry about the condition of his former lover and child. But what he saw there made him saddened even more. He saw Sheza and the child, who was no longer alive. In his memories, he remembered Sheza as a girl who always smiled and gave him happiness with joy. But the Sheza he saw in the hay was no longer smiling. Helios realized that she would never again make him happy with a smile. However, when Helios wanted to reach for his beloved, he felt a strange energy of a poisonous color. Pointing his finger at the dark bruise on Sheza's neck, Helios realized it was Henry's poison. Helios looked at Sheza's body and couldn't believe that she had allowed others to do this to her. He continued to stand, pondering the fact that it was most likely Heinrich von Ede who had killed his love. But Helios also could not forgive himself. He remembered Sheza's tears and realized that it was his fault. As he continued to stare at Sheza with his mouth ajar, Helios realized that if he hadn't driven her away, she would still be alive. Helios also looked at the items that were in the stable. He realizes that the child should not be left here. The Duke looked at his daughter, feeling something unpleasant and difficult in his soul that was written on his eyes. The protagonist also looked at Helios, only at this moment realizing that this was her father in his third life. A saddened Helios couldn't get the moment out of his mind when Sheza told him that she would name their daughter after Blizz. But at that moment, the Duke suddenly opened his eyes and screamed throughout the bedroom because it was a nightmare. He rose from the couch, sighing and telling himself that it was only a dream. A drop of sweat ran down the Duke's face as he tried to comprehend the fact that all of this had happened and none of it could be changed. However, the nobleman's peace was interrupted by Radietta, who burst into his room and shouted his name. The tired Duke told the maid that he should not have been disturbed, but Radietta said that her news was urgent. Helios was in great shock when he heard from the head maid that his daughter, Lady Blizz, had been poisoned. After that, Helios visited his knight even at night when there was only darkness and the moon outside the window. While the aristocrat was looking at the protagonist, Radietta said that it was after Henry's visit that the lady's condition worsened. The protagonist was crying with helplessness while Radietta kept telling the Duke that it was dangerous for them to stand idly by. But the Duke continued to stare at his daughter, remembering the name of the one who had recently dared to poison Blizz. Remembering his face, Helios realized that Henry had used Shaisa as a pawn to then kill her. Out of anger, the aristocrat shook the palm of his hand on part of the girl's crib, realizing that Ed would pay for this yet. He decided to address the maid, calling her by name, to which Radietta immediately responded. Unexpectedly to Radietta, the gentleman turned to her and asked if this was part of their plan. What seemed to be clear from Radietta's face was that she was clearly hiding something from her nobleman. But Helios realizes that absolutely everything is now repeating itself, just like the day they met. Radietta, to the Duke's surprise, made a cheerful and polite face when she asked what he was talking about. The maid changed the subject, saying that what was important now was Blizz's rescue. But Helios was in no hurry to speak, looking down at the floor. Not knowing the answer, the Duke asked the maid if there were any options about the rescue, to which Radietta replied that there were. Radietta said that the only thing he needed to do was to bring the dragon's blood. Helios was greatly surprised by the girl's words, because she suggested that he get the blood of the Emperor himself. The fact is that Emperor Riaz has the nickname Dragon, and his healing blood is so nicknamed because of it. Everyone says that his blood has a power that surpasses human blood by several times. But those who want this healing blood will only die. Looking at the furniture in the dark room, the aristocrat asked the maid if this blood could save Blizz. The girl replied that it could. About to make the promise, Helios put his hand to his chest, telling the late Shaisa that he didn't fully know what kind of happiness she was talking about. Remembering how happy they had been in the breach, Helios promised her that he would protect what she had left him. Pulling his cloak over himself, Helios alerted the head maid that he was leaving for the Emperor's palace. With thoughts that he would be able to protect Blizz, Helios arrived at the Emperor's mansion when it was dark night. The Duke walked down the hallway and thought about the fact that the Emperor should be in his study right now. He also clenched his hand into a fist, thinking that he urgently needed blood, so he would not wait until morning. But a step towards the Emperor was interrupted by an unknown voice that Helios heard behind him. Turning around, he saw a small boy in the hallway who told him that he shouldn't be here. The boy turned out to be the third prince of the Riaz Empire, Eldian Shen Riaz, who asked Helios if he had come for blood. Helios was surprised at the prince's guesswork, not realizing how he could have thought that just by seeing him in the hallway. He looked at the prince and didn't realize if the prince had also inherited the power of the Emperor's blood. Helios decided to be calm, telling the prince if he knew what he wanted, then he would get it. But also the Duke gave the boy a piercing look, asking him what he wanted in return. The third prince gave the nobleman his smile, praising him for being smart. As the moonlight streamed into the hallway, the boy replied to the Duke that this love of children was very unfamiliar to him. Still smiling, Eldian motioned for Helios to enter the study while he was still thinking about saving Blizz. Meanwhile, it was already getting light in the Duchy of Labian. The earliest birds were beginning to sing. All the while, Helios was followed by a little girl who remembered her daddy, wondering where he had gone. She ran to look for her father everywhere, for she always knew the fact that he was sitting at home without leaving it. The girl wanted to check another room by opening the door, but she was surprised by what she saw there. The dark-haired girl saw a baby in a crib who was crying and moving his hands. She immediately approached the main character, not realizing if she had a fever from being so red. But she was upset that she couldn't use the healing power from her family, which she would use on the baby. The kind girl decided to tell the heroine that she would always be there for her, even though she was sick. The daughter of Helios even offered the heroine of the story to sing a song to somehow calm her down. But the cute communication between the girl and the baby was interrupted by footsteps that she heard nearby. She was confused as she did not know where to hide, and if she was caught, she would be scolded. However, in time she noticed a large closet in the room, which was the perfect place to hide. When the girl was already in the closet, in the hallway, she heard her father's voice thanking someone. Gagging herself, the little girl realized that it was the voice of her daddy, who was obviously thanking someone for some favor. But the man quickly walked past the ajar door of the room where the girl was hiding and the infant was. Helios's daughter was already coming out of the closet, wondering what her father was talking about and to whom. The girl was already walking towards the main character, thinking about the fact that her father was clearly not talking about her. She approached the little one once more, already with a question about whether she was her sister. To find out the answer to that question, she looked closely at the little girl's eyes and realized that they were the same as her father's. Tears were already coming to the little girl's eyes at the thought of her sister's eyes being prettier. As she tried to touch the baby, the little girl realized that Daddy had come to this daughter, but not to her. The girl wondered if she, Helena, was worse than her sister. She was already crying, saying to herself that Helena would try to be better. Eventually, she just sat down on the floor, crying and telling someone that she wanted to be her favorite daughter, too. It had been 2 weeks since the disgruntled protagonist had gotten to the Labian mansion. Helena was constantly keeping up with her, talking about how their daddy was the strongest mage in the Empire. The heroine realized that after she came away from Ed's poison, she had 2 changes. The first is that this girl is keeping up with her. The protagonist kept looking into the girl's face, realizing who she was. While the girl was smiling, Blizz already knew that this is Helena, the future villain in the novel. She is the daughter of the late Duchess and Blizz's half-sister. In the novel, she was an arrogant and haughty girl. And also in the novel, she became closer to Henry than her father, thanks to Duke Ed from a neighboring duchy. Watching the cheerful girl, the heroine actually didn't even know that Helena loved her father so much. Presenting before her a message about the end of life, the heroine realizes that if she does not change the future, she will simply disappear. But the heroine is distracted by Helena's words that she is actually jealous of her because her dad visits her often. Hearing this, on the face of the heroine blossomed into a smile, realizing that she is loved more than Helena. But there was another change in the girl's life. At this time, a man entered her room. The change was that her father, that is Helios, was visiting her even more often. This time, he also decided to check on the heroine. He came to her crib one day, peering at the protagonist through the cloth and saying nothing. Blizz was silent as well, but after Helios just turned his back on her and walked away, the heroine freaked out, not understanding what he wanted from her. The heroine sighed heavily because she doesn't understand what her daddy wants when he comes at her and looks into her eyes. But while Blizz was thinking about it, her attention was caught by Helena's voice, who was still nearby. Helena confessed to her sister that she wasn't allowed to see her dad, even though she wanted to so badly. Helena also remembered her mom and thought that it was probably because of her, because Dad and Mom were on bad terms. The girl looked at the heroine with a smile, asking her if her father would accept her if he disliked her so much. But that's not what Blizz realized at that moment. Helena really does love her daddy, and Helios doesn't pay enough attention to her. Blizz realizes that Helena is just as eager to get attention from Daddy as the protagonist. At the same moment, for some reason, the heroine thinks about Helios not caring about her. She doesn't understand how she couldn't have guessed this. The heroine realizes that she hasn't needed affection for a long time, but because of Helios's coldness, Helena may truly fall in love with Henry. And all this trouble, according to the heroine, will only appear because Helios will constantly turn his back on Helena. However, the heroine decided to stop thinking about it, worrying all the time while Helena was still by her side. The heroine's sister decided to touch the baby's cheek, admitting that she would continue to come to her no matter what. In fact, while Helena was touching the heroine, she herself was thinking about how she was really tired of lying down because it was boring. After that, the protagonist squeezed Helena's finger in her hand while her sister told her that everything would be fine. Helena was so pleased with her sister's touch that she looked at her with happy eyes and a smile. But while the girl was playing with the main character, she was being watched by one servant the whole time. He was surreptitiously standing outside the door, watching the girls spend time together with some disgust. The butler decided to quietly leave, whispering that Helena's behavior towards the protagonist really annoyed him. Meanwhile, in secular society, rumors had already spread that Duke Helios had a child out of wedlock. Aristocrats did not stop gossiping about the fact that the Ed family has intentions to poison Labian's illegitimate daughter. The very first news that was loudly discussed was about Duke Helios's illegitimate child. But also the aristocrats were standing around talking about the second prince who seemed to have passed away just recently. The other news concerns who exactly would succeed the emperor if the second prince died. Meanwhile, something is already happening in the emperor's palace. The third prince was clearly pushed to the floor hard by someone. The boy who dared to do that also told Eldian with a smile that he was so weak that he was disgusting to look at. This boy's name is Risol Sarias, and he is the first prince of the imperial family. But Eldian wasn't going to give up. He clenched his palm into a fist, about to address his brother. The blue-eyed boy turned to his brother and addressed him, saying that he wasn't hurt at all. But Risol was infuriated that his rival still called him brother. He looked at him with embittered eyes. Risol told Eldian not to call him brother anymore, threatening him with his life and telling him Maul knows he is not the white sheep he is playing. However, Eldian continued to taunt his brother, getting up off the floor and calling him that, asking him what he meant. This made Rysal even more angry, causing him to yell at his brother to shut up before he paid with his life. To make matters worse, Rysal asked his brother if he knew what would happen if he continued to act like this. Eldian wanted to answer him something, but Rysal only grabbed him by the collar, loudly ordering him to shut his mouth. Looking his younger brother straight in the eyes, Rysal told him that he would crawl on the floor just like an insect. After that, he once again pushed Eldian hard to the side, yelling at him to hurry up and get out of here. Right in front of Eldian's eyes, his brother would turn his back on him and leave without even saying something goodbye. But his brother's oppression did not upset Eldian in the least. He sat on the carpet with a smile, saying that Rysal had a temper. The boy's monologue was interrupted by someone who appeared behind him and said that his brother was trash. That person turned out to be a servant of the Riaz family named Lamiar, who told Eldian that his brother was nothing. But when Eldian said that he was overconfident, Lamiar became furious, telling the nobleman that his brother was really disgusting. After Eldian asked the servants about his order, the Lamiar said he was fine and had given the blood to the Duke. This news cheered Eldian up. He broke out into a smile, telling the servant that this was very good. But Lamiar did not relent. He asked the boy anxiously why he was cooperating with the Labian family since no one trusted them. Eldian said it can't be helped and was about to go. But in fact, he was much more serious than that, as his eyes showed. He had thought of everything from the beginning. Presenting Helios, Eldian had actually realized long ago that no one would help him but him. The fact was that a few days ago, some interesting events had occurred at Duke Labian's residence. Eldian, the third prince, visited the protagonist, looking at her attentively while Helios stood in front of him. The boy had previously made a cut on his finger, which caused blood to flow, one drop of which was already falling. And this healing and magical drop of blood of the imperial heir fell directly on the forehead of the little protagonist. Noticing that the drop had just vaporized, the boy told Helios that he still needed a lot more blood. The boy also said that he could provide them with a better supply in exchange for something. Helios wondered what the prince meant. The kind-looking boy turned around and said that he only needed two things. The first was a magical sword that Helios possessed and that he needed to give to the boy, he said. The shocked Duke was surprised by this and wanted to object, but the boy interrupted him, saying that he knew everything perfectly well himself. Eldian repeated that he knew that only the Duke's family could wield the sword and that all others would be crazy about it. But the boy also made a second condition, which was that Helios should hide it in his possession when the time came. Eldian supplemented the words by saying that his body was still young, so he should come to him when he matured. Helios objected to the third prince, saying that his chance of survival would be very low. However, the boy reiterated once more that he shouldn't care about that. At this time, the protagonist was sleeping a sound sleep. Looking at the sleeping Blizz, Eldian also told Helios that he should take into consideration that only he could neutralize Ed's poison. The third prince then extended his hand to the Duke, asking him enticingly if he would agree to all the terms. Helios paused and thought for a moment, for the magic sword was his family's secret weapon. However, he already knew that his answer was obvious. He bowed to the third prince, thanking him for his help. This pleased the prince. He said it was good, realizing that the Duke had agreed to the terms. Right now in history, the struggle for the imperial throne is the most discussed topic in society. The third prince doesn't have much success in the fight, so he needs the sword to win the battle for the throne. With the thoughts that he needs to resolve some issues, Helios decided to hold a meeting with his relatives at his residence on the current day. All the relatives were furious and outraged when they heard Helios say that he wanted to give the mansion to his illegitimate daughter. One of the relatives even said that a Western mansion for an illegitimate daughter was too much, as she herself was a disgrace to the family. The other relatives of the Duke agreed with these words, saying that things would get even worse. The words of the relatives quickly angered Helios, causing him to ask them if they even had the right to vote. Everyone in the meeting fell silent, listening to what the head Duke had to say. Helios continued to glare at his relatives, threatening them that if they continued to look down on his daughter, he would take action. The Duke also told everyone if they were unhappy with his decision, they could just tell him so. In addition, the nobleman stood up from his seat, threatening everyone that he would cut off the tongue of those who dared to disagree with him. All of Helios's relatives fell silent, not even thinking of saying anything against his daughter or himself. But the Duke was about to leave, telling everyone that Blizz von Labienne was the name of his own daughter. After these events, the protagonist in the body of a baby had already arrived at that very western mansion. The heroine looked at it, not even believing that this whole castle was solely for her. Apart from the heroine, Radietta was also shocked and asked the subordinate next to her if this was a joke. The golden-haired Harold von Valentine replied that it wasn't a joke and the Duke had indeed given this mansion to Blizz. Also, Harold said that it would be announced at the elders' meeting as well, so they shouldn't worry. Because of this, Radietta remembered the events that had happened recently before this day. She was following the heroine as usual. But suddenly Helios entered the room and said that he had had enough. Radietta was then startled by his words. But the fright from the maid quickly went away when the Duke explained his words that his daughter could no longer be in this room. Radietta continued to stare at the palace in the present tense, not understanding who gives mansions to their young children in the first place. Harold also remained silent, assuming that the Duke was doing it to bolster the position of the young lady that is Blizz. When the servant said that Blizz had been given the most historic annex of all, the heroine was horrified, realizing how precious it was. The subordinate and the maid with the heroine in her arms then decided to go inside while Blizz calmed herself down from the shock. The heroine also thought in surprise at the fact that most likely Helena also does not know that she has moved, and after all, she often visits her. Meanwhile, at the Duke's residence, Helena had already recognized the fact that the little girl was no longer in the mansion. She was surprised by this. She looked at the empty crib and could not understand where the baby could have gone and who took her. But the girl was interrupted from her search by the scary voice of an adult who told her that she was here again. Helena was frightened. Standing behind the girl was the girl's scary and angry butler named Jaegers, who was clearly unhappy that Helena was here. While the girl was shaking with fear, he asked her if he hadn't forbidden her to come in here before. The girl said fearfully that she was a member of the Ed family, and she was not allowed to be friends with the Labian family. The mad butler asked Helena if she was following Mr. Ed's instructions. Helena fearfully replied that she was. After that, Jaegers smiled evilly, saying that he was glad she hadn't forgotten about it. Leaning over, the butler told the girl that the infant had been moved to the West Annex, and if she missed Blizz, they could give her something. Helena rejoiced at this, telling the butler that she really wanted to give something to Blizz. To this, the smiling butler replied that they would be sure to have something for her. Thinking of the mysterious plush bunny, Helena's butler even said that he had already prepared a special gift for it. A couple days ago, the butler was freaking out and losing his temper, hitting the wall with his fist at the information about Blizz. He sighed heavily and was angry at the whole situation, and Shesa especially, who had left behind a child. Veins even appeared on Jaeger's face as he gritted his teeth, realizing that the main character was ruining everything. Remembering Shesa with her child, he wondered why he had to shake at all since no one wanted the heroine now. But his face spread into a smile as he turned around and looked at the rabbit, realizing he had one way to solve everything. The rabbit looked normal, but the butler was already asking himself if he could eliminate Blizz by mere chance in his opinion. It was this rabbit that the butler had given to Helena when she had agreed to give something to the main character. Helena was already showing the plush toy to her sister, which made Blizz herself excited as well. While Helena was putting the toy in the heroine's crib, Blizz herself was thinking about the fact that Helena had found out that she had moved after all. And when Helena started asking the heroine if her daddy had come to see her, she only smiled, turning away from her sister. Still, though, the heroine was worried that Helios no longer visited her as often as he used to. Helena was also sad about her daddy, wondering if he was only coming here because of her. The heroine immediately noticed the fact that Helena looked tired, causing her to turn her head to her curiously. Blizz continued to stare at the rabbit while Helena apologized to her for saying what she thought was nonsense. The protagonist continued to look at the toy and at Helena, realizing that she really wanted her father's attention. Because of this, the heroine remembered her past life where she felt all the same things because of her tyrant father. But Helena continued to entertain the infant, saying that this bunny was prepared for her by the butler himself. A few minutes later, Helena was already saying goodbye to the heroine, waving at her and telling her that she would be back very soon. Blizz was waving back too. The main heroine saw Helena off with a look, realizing that it would be nice if Helios paid more attention to her. After Helena, Radietta entered the heroine's room and asked the heroine if she was having a good time with her. Blizz gave a wooten response. Radietta and Blizz were having fun while a plush hare continued to lie in the heroine's crib. The maid turned her attention to the toy, touching it with her hand while Blizz tried to say something to it like a small child. Suddenly, when she picked up the toy, her eyes turned red and a strange magic appeared around her. Radietta told the heroine that it was a wonderful gift. Radietta then put the toy back down, telling the little girl that her father would be coming to see her soon. Blizz was a little displeased at this. Just as Radietta said that, Helios soon entered her room and walked towards her. And the protagonist continued to think indignantly that it was very strange to give her an entire castle. Her father continued to read the heroine a tale from the book while Blizz herself reflected on the fact that she never would have thought it would come to this. The girl was also surprised that Helios began to read her the tale himself. The heroine also found it a bit suspicious. Helios continued to read a passage from the tale that the girl came when everyone was in despair. His eyes were looking into the book. But Blizz was also surprised that the tale was too familiar to her than she had previously realized. Her father quickly closed the book afterward, telling his daughter that they would stop there today. While the heroine was looking at the book, Helios promised her that when she learned to speak, she would tell him whatever she wanted. But the protagonist could not get used to the increased attention, continuing to be in the arms of her father. The girl heard from her daddy that he was giving her this book. The heroine realized that this was the first thing she had ever been given. She placed her little hand on the book, realizing the fact that it made her feel very good to have someone thinking of her. In fact, remembering Helios, she thought he was a different person altogether, but it didn't turn out that way. The heroine's thoughts were interrupted by Papa's words. He asked Radietta, standing next to him, if Helena had come today. The maid politely replied that Helena had been here before he came. This surprised Helios. Touching the cheek of the main character, Helios decided to tell Blizz that that girl was her sister. Looking at his daughter with a smile, Helios also said that it would be nice to introduce them closer and officially. Thinking back to Helena, Blizz began to think about Helena thinking of herself as an unloved child because of her father's ignoring her. While Helios was ordering the maid to prepare a cot for Blizz, she thought about what her father himself thought, saying Helena hated him. As the other servants looked on, she realized that Helios and Helena probably didn't understand each other. Imagining a smiling Helios, the protagonist realized that he was quite kind and a good family man. The girl also remembered Helena, realizing that parental love is obviously important to her at that age. Blizz understands and imagines the fact that it would be good for them to spend time together to create a harmonious family. At this point, the heroine looked at her little hands and feet and wondered what she could do to make this happen. As she continued to imagine a happy Helena and Helios, the heroine realized that it would be better if she left this family. Meanwhile, Helios was already leaving the castle, telling Radietta that he would be gone as he would be meeting with the third prince. The Duke turned to the headmaid and ordered her to take good care of Blizz for Radietta's consideration. But she only smiled sweetly, saying nothing to the Duke. Lastly, she bowed to the nobleman, promising him that Blizz would be safe with her by her side. After saying goodbye to everyone, the Duke slammed the door shut after him, leaving the maids alone. The red-haired maid decided to tell Radietta with a smile that they had really been working hard lately. To this, the head maid replied that it was not surprising, as this girl was now a very valuable product, which sounded strange. However, Perry had some doubts about the safety of the little girl because of this toy. Radietta noticed that. Radietta decided to check with the protagonist with a smirk if she was talking about that toy that Helena brought. Thinking back to the butler, Radietta said that he was most likely the one who decided to make the first move, waiting for the Duke to leave the house. Radietta also confessed that she had previously hidden the toy's energy so that Helios wouldn't notice it, but it would soon be revealed. To Perry's surprise, Radietta advised her not to worry about Blizz, as she would handle everything on her own. Noticing the sly smile on the always kind maid's face, Perry heard her say that if the heroine couldn't handle it, she would die. Meanwhile, Helios was already in the mysterious forest, where he was using magic to open a portal to the cave. He came to a dark tunnel where there were beautiful red stones emitting a bright light. But it wasn't them that interested the Duke. He stared intently at the object he must now give to the third prince. In front of Helios in the red stone was the very magical sword that he would now give to the third prince in exchange for his blood. Imagining someone with this sword in their hands, the Duke remembered that this cold weapon had made everyone go crazy before. Imagining the mad lord of the magical sword, Helios recognized the fact that if it wasn't for the deal with the prince, he wouldn't be here. Helios looked at the sword in the red stone and wondered if the third prince could control this power. But Helios's musings were interrupted by a sudden and violent noise that he heard behind him and was startled by. He instantly turned around and realized that right now there was a magical reaction that was in the Western Palace. 10 minutes ago, Helena was already finishing writing assignments from the butler in her study, holding a sheet in her hands. Her personal butler was praising Helena for her work, but the girl felt uncomfortable since she wanted to see Blizz. But when the butler said she could go see her sister after checking her homework, Helena was overjoyed. The butler asked the first question regarding her family's abilities, to which Helena answered by saying that they have been manifesting since she was 3 or 8 years old. The malicious butler also decided to Helena about what would happen if a newborn's powers were specifically revealed. The girl complimented the teacher's words. Mole will pour out a huge mana in strength, and the child's life will be jeopardized. After the butler decided to quietly confess that he hid hidden magic in a toy for Blizz, Helena doesn't realize what he's talking about. The world around Helena seems to crumble when she hears from the butler that this is a classic scheme to kill a family member. The butler, who was laughing with anger, even told the child that magic was about to work and create an explosion. While the girl didn't understand anything, the butler turned to her and told her that the family would now have only one successor, her. Helena realized that that toy she had given Blizz could take her life right now. Then came the explosion that everyone heard, and that made everything shudder. A maid came into the room with Helena and yelled for everyone to run out of the building. But crying Helena at this time couldn't believe that she had just killed her own sister. As all the objects around her fell, she thought to herself that she couldn't let Blizz die. With those thoughts, she ran out of the room, hoping that she could save the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist in the crib couldn't understand what was going on, why there was so much smoke, and why she felt sick. The girl felt a dark fear because of the thoughts that her life would end on such a sad moment. The heroine tried to shrink into a lump, mentally calling for someone to help her. And she opened her eyes wide when she clearly heard Helios's voice calling her by name. Duke immediately appeared in front of the girl and grabbed her in his arms to save her from the explosion and debris. He even tried to calm her down by looking into her eyes with worry and telling her that everything was all right. Her father's words and deed in her third life touched the heroine to her heart, which was evident in her surprised eyes. The little girl even cried, realizing that her father was there for her, unlike her previous parents. Helios hugged his daughter tightly while Blizz thought the warmest words of all for her. After that, Daddy and daughter were on their way out of the destroyed building. Blizz didn't realize what had happened, but the main character's attention was attracted this time by a child's voice that was calling her. This made the girl surprised again. She was already coming down the stairs in her daddy's arms, wondering if she had heard it. But to Blizz's surprise, someone kept calling out to her as if looking everywhere. That child turned out to be Helena, who met her daddy on her way, causing her to be very surprised. Helios immediately asked her what she was doing here, while Blizz also looked at her, wondering the same question. Helena, thinking of her daddy being mad at her again, tried to tell him the truth but couldn't because of her tears. While the Duke was telling her that it was very dangerous here, Helena kept telling him to forgive her for everything, as if it was her fault. Helena was shaking violently, trying to tell her daddy that the toy and the butler did it all to her, but she couldn't do it. Hearing her sister's words, the heroine was greatly shocked because all of this happened just because of this plush toy. Looking at the broken objects on the floor, Blizz couldn't even imagine what else the evil butler had said to Helena. Helena apologized to her father in tears, telling him that it was her fault because she had given that toy to Blizz. The girl said that she only wanted to please the little girl, not to kill her. The protagonist really sympathizes with her sister. She realizes that it's not really her fault, so Blizz tried to tell her not to get so upset, but at that age the girl couldn't speak yet. Imagining in her mind how Helios turns away from Helena, the protagonist realized that this is approximately how a child who lacks parental attention, love, and affection should act. Also, the protagonist realizes the fact that Helena was constantly left alone after she brought her into the house. She must have longed for her father's attention, but was constantly left alone just because of her. Blizz couldn't help but think of the butler who took advantage of Helena's lack of attention. He wormed his way into her confidence, after which he used her only to kill the protagonist, which he failed at. While Blizz was deep in thought about how Helena was just unlucky, Helios moved closer to his daughter, about to comfort her and tell her that it wasn't as she just said. The girl was already crying from grief and from allowing herself to jeopardize the main character. Tears were dripping from her cheeks and she was sighing heavily, expecting the most severe punishment from her father for her deed. But to the girl's surprise, her father did not scold her or beat her. He just sat down beside her, putting his hand on her shoulder and telling her with a smile that it wasn't her fault and he wouldn't scold her because he was always there for her. Helena's father wiped the tears on his daughter's cheek, continuing to reassure her with words that she would always be safe with him, so she shouldn't cry so bitterly right in front of him. Such kind words made the little girl cry even harder. More tears flowed from her eyes as she asked her father if she was still his daughter. This question surprised Helios, causing him to look at her in surprise. Helios even extended his kind hand to the girl, telling his daughter that of course she was, and she would never become some other person to him, worse than she was. The Duke not only extended his hand to Helena, but he spoke her full name to her, telling her that she was Helena von Labian and she was worthy of the name. By extending his hand to Helena, the Duke thus told her to go into his arms. At this time, the protagonist in Helios's arms remained silent and looked at her half-sister. Helena, who had been upset earlier, couldn't even guess that her father wouldn't just not scold her, and would just stand by all the mistakes that made her feel ashamed. She looked at Helios while tears of happiness were already flowing from her eyes. The happy family hugged together. Helena ran to her daddy, after which he hugged her tightly, also holding the main character in his arms as well. The family continued to hug in the ruined, most historic Labienne mansion, and Helios kept telling his daughter that he was sorry that all this happened. Suddenly, the Duke decided to do what he had wanted to do earlier. He showed Helena the main character and told the girl that it was her little sister named Blizz. Both girls were surprised at who they really were to each other. Helios continued to smile with happiness and told the children that he greatly regretted not introducing them sooner. He also asked Blizz if she realized that she had a sister in front of her. But in fact, the heroine understood much more than the Duke thinks. Meanwhile, Helena herself couldn't be happy that she recognized her sister's name. She looked serious, but she repeated the heroine's name, about to spew out her joy. A happy Helena looked into the eyes of the protagonist with the happiest eyes in the world, telling the girl that she was her sister, and that surprised her very much. Looking at her sister, the heroine of the story realized that it turns out that no one hated her all this time. Everyone needed her, but the heroine did not feel this immediately for the reason that she also did not feel parental love before. The girl realized that now she did not want to leave the Duke's family just because she felt superfluous. In her soul, it was as if pink colors played when she realized that she was far from superfluous in Helena's relationship with her father. The heroine of the story even felt a real family as she played with Helena and while Helios watched them, showing his daughters his happy but humble smile. Sometime after the explosion that destroyed most of the historical building, the mansion was well rebuilt thanks to the magic of Duke Helios. The Duke also caught the very butler who had been using Helena, after which he ordered him to be fired. By doing so, he spared his daughter from the psychological abuse she felt from the servants. But the most important thing is that now Helena and Helios come to visit the protagonist in the crib together. The father often holds his daughter in his arms, cheering her up and giving her a smile. Because of this news, the protagonist grew up and rejoiced, realizing that the duchy was now much calmer. She often showed her family her smile, showing how much she missed them all. But also rejoicing along with the protagonist was one pink cloud that suddenly appeared next to her, showing emotions of happiness. The cloud was flying and looked like cotton candy or a fluffy kitten. Hearing strange noises, the girl calmed down, not even realizing what she had just heard. She sighed, going to take a better look around. The main character turned her attention to the flying cloud, realizing that there was no such thing in the original novel. She looked at it, asking what it was, and the cloud answered her that she was magic. The heroine immediately remembered the moment when her dad carried her away from the mansion after the explosion. In fact, she heard a child's laughter then, but did not give it much importance. The girl thinks it came from the explosion. Blee continued to stare intently at the pink cotton candy that was flying around her, thinking that it probably wasn't dangerous, but she still needed to check it out. The first thing the protagonist decided to check with the cloud was to look at herself suspiciously. When she and her family were reading the story, the girl looked at the cloud that only she could see and realized that it was not hostile to her. The second thing that the heroine wanted to check with the strange creature was the presence of an ability that allows him to read her thoughts. One day, Blizz asked the cloud for a book in her mind, and it actually brought it to her, which surprised the heroine. And the third thing the protagonist noticed was that this cotton candy never lags behind her, not even for a second. Thanks to this, Blizz made the final conclusion that this magic is not dangerous to her at all. At one point, when the cloud flew close enough to her, the protagonist pointed her finger at it, making it stop. She did so in order to tell it something important. As she continued pointing her finger at the cute cloud, the determined protagonist told him that if it was going to follow her forever, then he should already come up with at least some sort of name. Blizz then looked into the cute cloud's eyes, which were more like buttons, and asked him if he liked the name Cloud. Just because of that word, the flying cotton candy flew even higher with happiness, telling the main character that she adored it and that it was now a cloud, which was very cute. The heroine looked at her new friend in surprise. Cloud continued to fly around in the protagonist's room while Blizz realized that it was likely that the name was very much to the liking of the strange creature that could fly and read her mind. She looked at her small, young hands for a moment, thinking about how she could hardly do anything useful or important in this fragile and defenseless body. Looking afterwards at the strange, joyful cloud, the protagonist realized that together with it, she could do more than with her frail body. She realized that together with it, it would be easier to plan her future. The girl continued to stay in the beautiful and renovated historic palace, realizing that at this point she cannot live alone because she is obliged to give the Labian family happiness. The main character feels this way because this is the first family she has had in 3 lifetimes. Of course, she doesn't want to miss out on the happiness and keep it so she can at equal sign see her dream and feel love for the first time. Tearing pages out of the book that she doesn't want, Blizz realized that she has to change the course of history to be happy. The most important thing she believes is that Helena cannot be allowed to fall in love with the protagonist of the original novel. Blizz also recalls that in the novel she read in her first life, Helena was very much in love with him, but luckily now she has not even met him. But also the protagonist has also realized that she needs to maximize the influence of her family to gain authority. The girl thinks that this will be easy for her to achieve, since she knows the future thanks to the novel. While remembering her enemies, the protagonist also realized the fact that the original story of the novel is 20 years away, and all the open minds along with the dresses will be used against her enemies. The girl also remembered in the face of one of the main characters in the novel, the girl with red hair, realizing that she absolutely does not care about the way she will start to act. Because the protagonist is ready right now to protect her family, sacrificing even her life for its happiness. She already imagines the fact that she is happily playing with her dad and sister in nature when there is a wide smile on everyone's face. After gaining motivation, the little girl decided to ask the cloud for something. She held out her hand to it as it flew closer to her, after which she asked it to take her to the butler's room itself. Meanwhile, in the Duke's study, Helios was already discussing something with the maid. He was looking at the tattered, plush rabbit that Helena Blizz had given earlier, and was telling Radietta that the item was a disguised artifact that increased magical power. Helios also told Radietta that when he entered the room, he felt nothing. He said that he knew that hiding the toy's energy was the job of the head maid specifically. After that, an exasperated Helios turned to the maid, asking her if she had something important to tell him or not. From the tone of voice and the Duke's gaze, one could understand the fact that he was in restrained anger. Radietta immediately decided to apologize to the nobleman with words, but to this the Duke replied that he didn't need it at all. He turned to the servants with an even more displeased look. Thinking back to the past when Radietta bowed to the Duke goodbye and promised him that she would take care of her daughter, Helios said that at that moment she had sworn to protect Blizz, but she had deliberately hidden the evil energy of the toy so that it would work. On that basis, the Duke asked the traitorous woman how he could trust her now, but Radietta folded her arms and suddenly said that it was already inevitable. The maid looked at her master and told him that the devil himself would soon awaken. At this moment, her eyes glowed with a red light, simultaneously showing coldness and severity to her interlocutor. The words of the serious girl made the Duke's skin turn white. He looked at her in shock, questioning what she had just told him. Presenting the image of the adult and long-haired protagonist in her head, Radietta also explained her words, saying that she did it in order to resist the devil. And for that, it takes a girl whose mana needs to be awakened urgently. Flustered by the maid's words, Helios turned to her and, with his mouth ajar, said that it was still undecided, and even the oracle had not yet come down to them. Looking at the maid with mad eyes that read fear and worry, Helios told Radietta that there was therefore no need to test such a dangerous method on the child, even when she had not discussed anything with him. But Radietta continued to remain calm. She again explained her actions by saying that even if she had asked the Duke about it, he would have forbidden her to do it, so she had awakened the heroine's mana without his permission. It was evident by Helios that this matter was bothering him a lot, taking all his strength away. At this time, Radietta advised the Duke not to make a fool of himself, for he himself knows everything perfectly well. Representing the very devil, Radietta reminded Helios that the imperial family and the 4 duchies exist to keep the demon king under control. Also introducing in one of the Labian family members next to the demon, the maid added to her words that the Labian family is the demon king's only and special enemy. Sighing and closing her eyes, Radietta told the Duke that he should know this better than anyone else, and he more than anyone should be prudent on the subject. The Duke was even more alarmed by the maid's words that this was their main role in this game. One can see by Helios that he is even more wary than before. But the conversation between the Duke and the maid was interrupted by another servant who burst loudly into their room and shouted that they were in big trouble. Radietta immediately turned around and Helios looked at the servant, who told everyone that the butler had escaped from the dungeon. Meanwhile, in a completely different castle, the butler was already telling his boss that Duke Helios's guards would become stricter than before. The butler and his boss were in a dark study that had a beautiful chandelier. Placing his gloved hand on the table, from behind which the thorny palms from magic could be seen, the butler also excitedly told the nobleman that Duke Labien even used his power. To this, the strict lord replied to the butler that he had yet to show what he was capable of. All the while, the servant looked down, excitedly agreeing with everything his boss said. Afterward, the aristocrat told him to sit quietly until he called for him. The butler immediately bowed, saying that he obeyed him unconditionally. The mysterious person with black eyes and hair threw her gaze at the portrait on the wall, for some reason telling him that her daughter looked very much like herself. All the while, Henry stared at the huge portrait of the late Shesa on his wall. It was right in Heinrich von Eda's office. Heinrich himself kept his eyes on her, as if missing her or regretting that she had died. He was preparing to make one more decision to make his plan for Blizz a reality. But Henry still turned away from the portrait, leaning on his arm and saying with a smile that the name Blizz sounded rather amusing to him. The aristocrat couldn't help but stop thinking about the main character. Imagining in his mind the explosion of the heroine's great magic, Henry realized that even when the butler failed in his task, he was able to find out how great her mana was that she managed to survive. Henry continued to sit on the chair, thinking about the fact that the protagonist was much tougher than he had previously thought, and that was his main mistake in the plan. He thought about the fact that if Blizz also had Ed's strength, then that could hinder his plans for the future even more. At this time, he was looking at a sheet that had short words written on it that they should overcome the collapse and survive by waiting for the next meeting. The Dark Duke continued to look at the sheet, thinking about how such a child in the Labian bloodline was too special. He also thought about whether he was to be feared and what the oracle would tell him on the matter. Meanwhile, in the palace of Blizz, Helios and Helena, the protagonist, had already gotten to where Cloud had asked her to go, the butler's room. There were many plants in it, as well as a desk. The protagonist was able to quickly find among the books the paper with a golden pattern that she needed, thinking that everything here was hidden better than she thought. The girl held that paper in her small hand, but the heroine continued to sit resolutely and cheerfully in her chair, telling herself that she had found something that was well hidden here, namely the Ed family's card, which she needed very much. The reason the girl decided that she needed this thing was because in the original story, it was Henry's men who had captured the Labian family. These are the same people that the protagonist met. The heroine then decided to thank the Cloud for its help, telling it that it had helped her a lot this time. The Cloud was pleased with Blizz and the fact that it was able to help her in some way. But at the same time, the heroine looked at her friend with seriousness, thinking that when she grows up, she will definitely act seriously. Blizz for this at first only need to learn to talk. Gradually the years changed, until 7 years had passed since the heroine had made that decision. She still grew up in the palace with her family in love and harmony. At this time, the protagonist has a dream, as she, already grown up, is notified by the maid that her older sister Helena has come to her. The girl is already 7 years old, She looks grown up and still happy. She turns to the door, already anticipating the appearance of her favorite big sister. In the original novel story, as in all typical romances, there are some very attractive men, and it's understandable why Helena was constantly jealous of Blizz. The boys literally kept up with her. One boy touched the protagonist's hair while talking to her about how what he said before was just a joke. The boy is clearly in love with Blizz, which he doesn't hide in relation to her. This boy turned out to be the third Prince Eldian, who was looking at Blizz and talking to her as if she had already filled his heart like a true lover. The boy replied to the girl that she had a very funny reaction to everything. The Eldian, along with the main character, stood in a beautiful place right in the middle of the clearing while their clothes were being blown around by the wind. The lover told Blizz to wait for him as he would be right back. But no sooner had the protagonist seen Eldian off than another blonde-haired boy immediately appeared in front of her and told her to be careful, as she had probably done something wrong. A second handsome boy appeared right in front of Blizz, telling her to be more careful. He, too, most likely has strong, loving feelings for the protagonist, just like Eldian. But the girl felt the footsteps of her third fiancé as well, who stopped right in front of her, saying that he, too, wanted to be first. He was wearing black, stylish boots. Her third lover, a brunette with green eyes, appeared in front of the girl, who politely told the lady that she didn't have to choose him, but he didn't want her to leave him. Just like that, the protagonist is faced with three handsome men who have feelings for her. She knows that in the novel, the protagonist has been subjected to the attentions of several men, but something alarms her. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes wide, realizing that someone had been calling her all this time and that it was just a dream. Fortunately, this whole situation with the lovers did not turn out to be reality for the young heroine of the story. Blizz immediately got out of bed, not realizing why she was even dreaming this. She's not supposed to have so many lovers in the story, and they are all supposed to fall in love with Bella, the red-haired protagonist of the novel. The protagonist decided to walk out of her dark chambers into the bright hallway, unable to stop thinking about this whole situation. She doesn't understand why all the guys had strange questions and facial expressions, and why they fell in love with her in the first place. However, the girl's thoughts were interrupted by the one she saw in front of her. Standing in front of Blizz was her older sister Helena, who had also grown up. She had already turned 13 years old when the heroine is only 7 years old. The girl immediately decided to pounce on her sister, crying and confessing that she had a nightmare, but when she met Helena, according to the heroine, she felt better. Helena hugged her sister, wondering what kind of nightmare she had. The older sister of the protagonist strictly and maturely said that she was very sorry that she was not in Blizz's dream, otherwise she would have scolded everyone there who would allow her to scare her little sister in front of her. Helena said this to the heroine with complete confidence and seriousness. This pleased the little heroine even more. She reached out her arms to hug Helena a second time, thanking her for caring for her so much. What the little girl was actually recognizing was that a lot had changed in 7 years. The biggest news concerns the imperial family. The fact is, 2 princes had died recently, which shocked all the aristocrats who heard about it. In the duchies quickly spread rumors. Also, the heroine did not forget about another important fact that was formed because of the death of the 2 princes. Right now, there was a war between the first and third prince, Rysal and Eldian. Meanwhile, Henry had become Ed's heir. What this meant was that whoever wanted to kill the protagonist gained even more power than he had before, opening up new avenues for himself to create entirely new, devious plans for the Labian family. Also, thanks to knowing the entire story of the novel ahead of time, she already knew that Fabian Gold, who is another main character, was born somewhere. He has golden hair, just like his father. Meanwhile, the girls continued to talk to each other. Blizz asked her sister if she was busy and then told her that she didn't have to come and visit her every day. Helena replied that she just wanted to see her. Misunderstanding the main character's words, Helena got shy and asked her sister if she was bothering her if she asked such a thing. Blizz replied that it wasn't like that at all and she loved her very much. Blizz even confessed to her older sister that she would spend every single day with her if she had the chance. With those words, she hugged Helena while she laughed, agreeing with every word her sister said. The girls then decided to say goodbye by waving goodbye to each other. As happy as Blizz was, deep down she was worried about the future of her family, so she tried to play the perfect daughter. That's how the protagonist spent her time, also raising her hand in class with her teacher. After meeting with her sister, she was in classes where she raised her hand for the teacher, telling him that she had one question. Everything that needed to be taught to the girl was taught by Countess Lantes, who was a personal teacher to her. She had a pleasant appearance with brown eyes and hair, along with a cute face. She looked at the heroine and asked her what question she wanted to ask. It turns out the girl was concerned with whether the form of manna written in that book was different from the one she was born with. The teacher looked at the lady with a smile, realizing what she wanted to ask her. Drawing on the blackboard with chalk, the teacher explained to the curious girl that her judgment was indeed correct, because most likely the form of manna is taken by a person's internal readings. Already presenting the adult protagonist in her mind, the teacher continued to explain that those who possess manna and see its form are considered blessed, and such people, simply put, are considered magicians. The heroine was also alarmed when the teacher told her that, according to the records, it was impossible to do so now, as it was observed once in 1,000 years. The teacher added that a descendant of the Labian family had such abilities 1,000 years ago. The heroine was even more surprised when the teacher came closer to her and said that, as many years ago, this relative was able to face the devil with his powers, and because of this, the Labian family is now called the strongest family. The woman also said that it was the heroine who could possess such power. After a short story, the teacher decided that this was the end of their lesson, which she told Blizz. However, the protagonist herself couldn't stop thinking about what the teacher had just told her. She wondered if Cloud was probably with her for a reason. The protagonist was even more convinced of this when she heard from the teacher such important words about powers, ancestors, and confrontation with demons. Meanwhile, the Duke was already waiting to meet his business partner amidst the gloomy, rustling branches of the trees in the dark night. Someone appeared behind him, telling him that it had been quite some time since they had seen him. Helios was already turning to the third prince who stood behind him, telling him that it might be too dangerous for them to meet in the emperor's palace now. To this, the smiling Eldian decided to reply that his brother seemed to have gotten involved with Ed, so why should there be a law forbidding him from meeting the Duke of Labian? At first, Helios didn't even understand the meaning of the prince's words. Then the boy laughed a little, saying that it was a simple joke. After bowing a little, the polite boy told the father of the main character that he just came to say hello to him. After that, the third prince decided to talk about the deal, asking the Duke if he had forgotten about it. Helios replied that he would definitely give him the magic sword. Looking down at his counterpart, Duke Helios also told the third prince that he was staying in his position for now, not sitting on the throne of the emperor. The Duke wanted to remind the boy that as of today, he is not the emperor he sees himself as. The thoughtful gentleman replied to Helios that he understood that perfectly well. He too lowered his eyes, apparently thinking about something important. In fact, it wasn't really that big of a problem for Eldian, as he would keep going towards his goal. As the wind continued to blow outside and the bright stars continued to sparkle, Eldian also asked the Duke how today's banquet went, for Helios, in his opinion, is here to learn about the nobles' movements. The third prince told the Duke that the Ede lineage would be continued. To this, the Duke reacted calmly. He said that he realized that he had spread this rumor. The name in mind was Heinrich von Ed, also telling the third prince that he didn't care about which of his children would continue the lineage. The third prince of the imperial family continued to stand outside and talk to the Duke. He asked him if he would then allow the Duchy of Ed to do what they really wanted, for if his daughters had children, it would mean that the Ed lineage would continue. Helios took his head to the side and briefly told the prince that he wasn't ruling it out, but he wanted to get into foreign policy soon, thus figuring it out. The Duke said that he would do so in order to show that he was still in the prime of life. Suddenly dismissive of the curious, witty boy, Helios turned his face toward the third prince, looking at him with a piercing, dark gaze and asking him if that was the answer he wanted to hear from him. To this, the third prince of the empire only clapped his hands sarcastically, laughing as if Helios was now joking. He told the Duke that this was exactly what he wanted to hear, adding that he really liked Helios's cleverness. After these events, the Duke sat at his desk as usual and did his work. He thought back to the meeting with the third prince, realizing the fact that he was undoubtedly using all these people, but still he felt like more time had appeared than it had. The aristocrat held a stack of papers in his hands, gazing at it from deep thoughts. He thinks about the fact that he really disliked the fact that he was submitting to the third prince and following his terms, but it was better than doing nothing. But the brooding duke was distracted from his thoughts on the complicated strategy by someone who appeared in front of him, saying it was him. Helios instantly raised his head to see the face of the one who came to him and spoke. In front of the aristocrat was an influential man with blonde brows and hair who looked at Helios with his brown eyes. This man is the elder of the Duchy of Labienne. Helios asked Count Carus what happened. Count Carus didn't linger for long. He decided to tell the Duke at once why he came here, asking him what the rumors were that had spread about the Labian family. Meanwhile, Helios had already put the papers away and was listening to his relative's claims. Helios immediately decided to ask the Count if he had come just because of this. To this, the disgruntled man jerked his head to the side, beginning to speak by saying that he had long labored for the Duchy of Labienne. The blue-haired aristocrat continued to listen to his relative, realizing that Count Carus had many grievances regarding the inaction of the head of the family, regarding what others were saying about them. Helios was not even surprised by the man's words. Count Carus continued to stand in front of Helios in his office and vent his frustrations on him, telling him that his daughter, Lady Helena, had Ed's blood in her, and that the future of the Labian family was in jeopardy because of it. The man with the white beard did not stop talking, continuing to be satisfied. He turned his head away from the Duke as he began to talk about the illegitimate child, that is, the protagonist as well, trying to convince Helios that she was also ruining the family's reputation. While Count Carus was telling the Duke that the Labian family lineage should never be broken, Helios himself was laughing from one point. The thing was, if the Count knew that the heroine's mother was also from Ed's family, he would have definitely become furious. After Count Labian finally said all the things he was unhappy about, Helios replied to him that he understood his worries perfectly, then asked him if he thought the Labian family would still be able to prove themselves. Count Carus replied that he did. About to get up from his seat and go somewhere, Duke Helios thoughtfully told his interlocutor that he too had such thoughts after the recent banquet. At this, Count Carus told the Duke that he was absolutely right. After that, the aristocrat turned to the Count and once again told him that his upcoming birthday banquet would be public. So, according to the Duke, everyone should be well prepared. In history, the current head of the Labian family holds the title of the only archmage, the strongest in the continent. Helios von Labian is currently the most important representative of the aristocratic Labian family. But he is also, despite being powerful, respected, and recognizable, the Duke is also very secretive. The fact is that although he is the head of the duchy and the family, he is very rarely shown in public. Even in his place, he can rarely be found. Not only that, ever since he took over, there hasn't been a single even event to celebrate his birthday or any other events. Therefore, Helios's upcoming birthday banquet should be a high-profile event. One young aristocrat who is going to this banquet with a smile is thinking about it all. He was thinking about the fact that Helios's fatherly love was stronger than the Duke's principles after all. He also didn't forget that he himself had found Helios's weakness. With such thoughts, Riesel already wanted to go to the banquet. She had told someone that she had heard that Duke Labian was having a formal birthday banquet. He thought about the fact that if he could seduce and marry the daughter of Helios, the Duke could not refuse him. Behind the throne sat a man who clearly has the greatest influence in history among all. He has the most luxurious clothes among all, as well as a steady self-confidence. This is the Emperor Letheus Ino Riaz. He told his son that this was most likely the case. The family took their meals at the table while the Emperor's son continued to talk. Riesel told his father that he is very eager to go to this event to represent the imperial family there. The boy emphasizes that this is Helios's first big event. The emperor turned to his other son, the third Prince Eldian, asking him if he would like to go to the banquet with his father. The boy immediately said he did not, for his brother was the first to suggest it. Taking a glass of the dark drink in his hands, Eldian looked at his father with a kind smile. saying that he would defer to his brother in this. In fact, he surely understands the fact that Rhysol has a plan regarding influence and power. But Eldian's words made Rhysol so angry that veins appeared on his face. He was infuriated by his brother's words that he was supposedly conceding something to him. Rhysol thought his brother would change for the better, but it turns out he was wrong. At this time, the Emperor himself couldn't help but notice how worried his eldest son was. He looked at his hand, which was shaking as he tried to cut the meat with a knife. The father realizes that this is very important to his son, so he calmly told Rhysol that in that case, he could attend the banquet as a representative of the imperial family. The boy's hand that was shaking before stopped shaking with excitement. Rhysol raised his head to see his brother's reaction to his father's decision. But surprisingly, he watched a calm Eldian who was cutting his food on his plate. Rhysol wondered if he would be able to relax with the support of the Labian family. The first prince of the imperial family kept an eye on his white-haired brother, as he portrayed a firm calm and indifference to everything. He wondered what Eldian would do in case he also received support from the powerful Duke Helios. Meanwhile, the protagonist of the story in Duke Helios's mansion was sitting on a couch in a beautiful blue dress, thinking about her family. She was completely alone, so there was nothing stopping her from thinking as deeply as possible. She thought back to her recent lesson with Teacher Lantes. Due to the fact that she wanted to help her family, she found out that it was Duke Helios who was the last mage in the Labian clan and family. The protagonist also realized that the inaccessible to knowledge takes the form of magic and opens the way to it. The girl realized that if she wants to get magical powers, then she needs to work hard in their awakening. The girl thought hard about it. When she first learned about it, she immediately wondered if she had such power because she was also from the Labian family. From the heroine did not lag behind these questions, and so she urgently wanted to know the answer to them. But suddenly Blizz remembered the very dream she had recently had. She remembered the face of all those who bowed to him in love in the dream, thinking about the fact that lately she has also been having strange dreams that are hard to explain. The protagonist clearly remembered the face of the one who had first approached her, saying he would return. He had silver hair and intense blue eyes, which were adorned with a cute smile on the guy's face. Blizz also didn't forget about the second guy who was also in love with her in her own dream. He had golden hair and eyes, and unlike the first, he appeared suddenly, also showing concern for the heroine, as if they were already a couple. The last person the girl saw in her dream was a guy with dark hair and green eyes, who even held the protagonist's hand, as if wanting to get special attention or deference from her. Blizz was confused by all of this because in that dream she felt like she was the main character in some harem novel. She still doesn't understand why they all fell in love with her specifically, if the original novel already has a protagonist with red hair. However, the girl decided to calm herself down, assuring that perhaps she dreamed about them because she knows them and is not sure of her judgment, so she will just stop paying attention to it because that's not what's important now. The protagonist remembered that in her very first encounter with the cloud, when she was still a baby, it appeared to her as magic. The girl is still surprised that this miracle happened to her. The protagonist also recalled a recent lesson with her teacher and the moment when she explained a question to her by drawing something on the blackboard. The girl kept thinking that this cloud was not only shaped, but also talking to her. With such thoughts, Blizz quickly came to the conclusion that she should ask her questions to the cloud because it obviously knew something more than she did. The girl held out her hand, causing a magical pink light to appear in front of her. Immediately after that, her longtime friend, the cloud, appeared above the protagonist's head and asked her if the girl had called him. The protagonist did not linger long, because of which she asked if it was magic. The cloud flew closer to the protagonist and cheerfully replied that it is the real magic that she knows. The girl touched the strange creature with her hand, marveling at the magic. As the cloud wagged its tail in pleasure and hugged the top of the protagonist's head, Blizz herself couldn't believe it. She covered her mouth in shock, realizing that she was probably a mage too if she had a cloud. Meanwhile, the main character of the story had already been approached. The girl saw several maids and her head maid Radietta in front of her, who asked the girl what she was thinking about so much. The sweet girl immediately ran up to her favorite Radietta to hug her, calling out the name of the other maids as well, such as Perry or Liliana. Cloudy also flew near the heroine, but no one saw him except Blizz. Radietta's kind, red eyes looked directly at the protagonist while the joyful young lady asked the maids how they got here, if they disliked crowded places like this palace. The girl was embarrassed by the maid's words that this day was special for everyone, and now even Lady Helena and the Lord were coming. The maids also told the girl that she was dressed so beautifully that everyone would be crazy about her. After a while, the protagonist guessed that today was a special day because it was her father's birthday, but besides that, today they would make their first social outing in 7 years. The heroine looked out from behind the scenes, marveling at the number of aristocrats at the party. There were quite a few guests, but that was just the beginning. The girl saw the makus of various nobles who were already celebrating in the hall and waiting for the appearance of the birthday boy, the famous Duke Helios. The maid named Radietta noticed that the heroine was looking intently at the guests, because of which she decided to tell her not to worry so much, because she looks good and everyone loves her. But this girl only laughed ironically. The heroine remained silent and lowered her gaze, because the truth is that she has long ago not been embarrassed by anything and not afraid of anything, because she has lost faith in human favor. And this banquet is absolutely no excitement for her. Remembering her smiling and kind but modest father, with whom she used to walk in the garden, she realizes that she is now under his protection. They are on good terms, which pleases her greatly. And just because of this, the attitude of everyone in the palace towards the protagonist has become quite different. She remembers how they started to pay attention to her, even when she just wanted to show someone her drawings. The head butler, cook, and maids of her father's mansion treated her with respect, for which we can thank Duke Helios, because it was he who made everyone consider the heroine of the story a full member of the family. However, the protagonist is well aware of the fact that people outside the palace are not as kind as her servants. She knows that the aristocrats often spread rumors about her, so everyone considers her an extramarital disgrace. Blizz recalls that even her sister did not treat her like a sister, for which you can blame the butler, who, fortunately, is already in the dungeon. The protagonist realizes that now Helena treats her very well, but there were people who appeared as if they had shattered the right attitude towards Helena with a crack, learning that she was more from the family of Ed than Labienne. The girl reflected on the fact that this alone could cause problems in their family. The heroine also assumes that this is the reason why Helios threw the banquet, to show that all as well. But suddenly the girl was called by name, causing her to turn around, looking at the man. Blizz was greatly relieved when she saw her favorite sister in front of her. Helena just stood in front of her, and the protagonist was already ready to fly to the 7th heaven from happiness. But also standing next to her sister was her father, who had also come to please his daughter. Behind Helena stood a dressed-up and tall Duke Helios, while the protagonist told them both that she was very beautiful. Their outfits were indeed the most exquisite and expensive for aristocrats. The Duke had a brooch on his collar, and Helena had a necklace around her neck. It was written all over the girl's face that she was incredibly happy about everything that was happening to her. In response to the main character's compliment, Helena asked her sister if she was also beautiful today. The girl was indeed wearing a rich and harmonious look that consisted of roses of a soft blue color. Duke Helios continued to talk sweetly with the protagonist while the older sister looked at Blizz with a smile. At this moment, the protagonist realized that her family would always be with her, and that was very important to her. With the thoughts that she could handle any hardships, the girl was already ready to appear in front of the crowd of aristocrats for the first time. A loud voice of a man announced that Duke Helios and his 2 daughters were about to arrive, whereupon the main door to the hall opened ajar. The motivated young lady dared to appear in front of the crowd, showing everyone her confidence and determination. She took into consideration that she would do her best for her family, so there was not a shred of fear in her. But the girl only thought so. In fact, no one even paid attention to her, and those who did look at her. They began to whisper that she was the bastard child of the Labian family and nothing more. The protagonist decided not to give it a second thought, walking over to the dessert table and asking the servant for a single piece of strawberry candy. While the guy was cutting off a piece of cake for Blizz, the heroine thought about the fact that she had to face such looks in her direction in her past life as well. All the aristocrats were indeed glaring at her with disdain. They were both ladies in luxurious dresses and aristocrats with mustaches who wanted to see a child out of wedlock. Due to the large amount of attention from people, the girl was getting very tired, not realizing what was in store for Labienne's family because of her. Therefore, the heroine decided to just stand there and grudgingly eat strawberry dessert. This could not help but notice Fabian, because of which he approached the girl from behind, leaned over and asked if everything was all right. The heroine replied that everything was, if it was fate's will. Blizz's words surprised the servant so much that he asked the girl where she had learned such words. Blizz was in no hurry to answer the subject's questions. She remained silent as she watched her father surrounded by various aristocrats. They were all chatting nicely with him, which wasn't surprising since Helios was the culprit of the celebration. The protagonist also kept an eye on her older sister, who was playing in the company of her peers. In her company there were various aristocrats, but among them stood out a boy who had a classic suit with a tie. The attention of the main character was attracted by the fact that this very boy allowed himself to touch Helena, pushing her away from himself. At this point, it was as if they were yelling at each other while everyone around them was alarmed by what was happening. Noticing only that her sister was being touched, the main character of the story put her dessert in Fabian's hands in a daze, looking at the whole thing with stunned eyes and telling him that she had to help her sister immediately. Fabian was as surprised as the girl herself. The small and short protagonist immediately approached the boy and Helena, drawing attention to herself. Helena looked at her sister in surprise, not realizing what was going on. The young aristocrat did the same. The protagonist dared to appear right in front of the boy, pointing her finger at him and angrily asking who he was that he was allowing himself to touch her sister. There is so much anger and rage in the girl that she won't just leave this situation alone. But when the boy apparently didn't hear everything the first time, Blizz stomped her heel on the floor with rage, once again asking the boy who he is and what he allows himself. The boy was surprised by the young lady's behavior. He looked at her with his mouth open while the heroine of the story did not stop asking him why he was hitting on her sister. The young aristocrat decided to walk slowly towards Blizz, asking her if she was the illegitimate child everyone was talking about. Meanwhile, Helena remained silent, looking at the boy unhappily. The boy looked at the heroine with such a sneer and a wide smile that everyone was momentarily uncomfortable. He looked at Blizz and told her that he was merely cleansing Helena with his healing power. The young boy then turned to Helena with the same smile and said he forgot to introduce himself. The boy said that he was Frey von Agenta and he could use the power of purification better than Helena herself. After introducing himself, Frey went on to say that they should forgive him for his rude behavior, but the healing magic that Labienne's successor can use is only available to blood relatives. The main character was behind Helena's back, but that didn't mean what she feared. She was very angry, realizing that Frey wanted to humiliate her sister by showing that he had this ability and she didn't. At that moment, imagining the berry in her head, the heroine remembered that the power of the imperial family and the 4 duchies is indeed determined by the power of the most capable descendant, and the power is most often taken over by a direct descendant, but not always. The girl also imagined as if she were releasing from her hands a white dove, which is tied with a white bandage. The heroine realizes that there is a deeper meaning under the word healing than she thinks. Meanwhile, the boy continued talking, arrogantly telling Helena and Blizz that the Labian family's special ability is healing, and he hadn't heard that Helena's ability had already been revealed. Smiling broadly, Frey also told young Helena that she shouldn't worry too much about the fact that he couldn't use his power like he did. The boy even told her that she wasn't the only one like that, as if Helena was sick with something. While the young lord was humiliating Helena in front of everyone, Count Karras was watching along with the crowd, who was also curious about what was going on. To further humiliate Helena in front of everyone because of her lack of power, Frey told her with crazy eyes that only the best of the best could claim it. That's why he had this ability. But the protagonist wasn't going to stand for it. She clenched the fabric of her dress into a fist, realizing the fact that although she was small, she was smart enough to put the insolent man in his place. As the sunlight fell beautifully on the protagonist, she firmly and confidently admonished Frey, telling him that he was overreacting now. While in the hall, which was incredibly beautifully decorated and prepared for the banquet, the protagonist went on to say that today's party was thrown to celebrate her father's birthday and also to strengthen the unity of the families. Contrary to the protagonist being stopped by Helena, she continued to point her finger at the boy, telling him that he had said some very rude words. Frey just looked at the lovely ladies while listening to Blizz's words, that a person who allows himself to be called such names is obviously breaking all the rules of etiquette, and it should be taken into consideration. Meanwhile, Count Karas listened to the young girl's words perfectly and couldn't understand where she had already learned this from and how she could point out people's mistakes with such confidence at such an age. To him, this was quite commendable. The little girl kept pointing out to the older guy that his behavior only caused laughter, when Frey didn't understand how a little girl could talk to him like that at all. But the protagonist was already losing her temper with rage, shouting and asking the young lord why touch her sister at all, and why insult people by blabbing left and right about this healing. This rather startled Frey. When Blizz started literally ordering the guy to apologize for his words to his sister, Helena smiled because she felt not only protection from her younger sister, but also love with support. Suddenly, Helena decided to stand up for her little sister as well. She went after Frey, telling him that Blizz was right. The heroine was surprised by her sister's behavior, causing her to look at her in amazement. Standing right in front of the boy, Helena told him, "Mole, as you know, family power is not only passed on to the immediate descendants, he is also entitled to it." What was noticeable on Frey's face was that his ego was a bit lowered. Looking honestly at the young lord, Helena put her hand on her cleavage and told not only him, but everyone that he really wants to make the Labian family look bad. That's why he says such things. Helena also put her hand on the protagonist's shoulder, continuing to tell the aristocrat that he had started to touch on the personal topics of the Labian family members, which was even more punishable. The two sisters kept close to each other while Helena pointed out to the aristocrat that insulting her sister, still in the presence of others, was very low and rude as for a noble. However, the protagonist was more surprised that her older sister had told the offender right in front of her that he should recognize Blizz as Duke Helios's legitimate child and also apologize to her for insulting her. Helena looked at Blizz the same way, showing her smile and love. The heroine of the story realized that she had never protected anyone, but for her own sister, she would do anything. Also looking at Frey, the girl realized that he was even more embarrassed than she was when he humiliated her. Frey looked confused, trying to deal with the shame he was feeling. The main character kept her eyes on the guy who was racked with shame. Her violet eyes glared at him, realizing that the adults too were about to become upset over the new conflict. But what mattered most to Blizz was that she was able to defend her sister's honor. The girl noticed that all the aristocrats at the feast were already gossiping anxiously, telling each other what had just happened. The most important thing for Blizz now was not to fall into the mud and to get out of the difficult situation. Sighing, the small blue-haired lady began to tell Frey that she understood everything and that he was proud of the Labian family as much as anyone else. Raising her head and speaking louder, the girl warned the intimidated young man that what he was doing was wrong. The heroine also asked him to apologize once again if he cared about Labian's future. The protagonist continued to think that if Frey admitted his mistakes, he would realize what a bad person he was. Blizz looked carefully at the boy, who was unsure if he wanted to say something. As the girls expected, Frey bowed low before them, saying that he had indeed made a mistake at such an important event. The heroine of the story rejoiced, for her easy plan had worked. The aristocrat's time in the hall was interrupted by someone who was already walking towards his daughters, saying that they had most likely already cleared up the whole situation. Feet in men's shoes went to the center of the hall, because this person is the main one at this celebration. That person turned out to be Helios, who walked up to his daughters and told them that they had done a good job of putting Frey in his place. The girls were surprised to see their daddy come in the middle of the conflict. At this time, Frey looked at the family in confusion. Duke was telling Blizz and Helena that they handled the conflict well, even though there was such a commotion around. Helios was proud that the sisters had been kind to Frey. There were many aristocrats gathered around the Duke. They were all curious as to what would be said about this situation. The first thing Helios said was that he wouldn't call the boys' parents here because he didn't want a big conflict. While the girls looked at their father, who was defending their honor in front of everyone, Helios also loudly proclaimed that Helena and Blizz were direct descendants of the Labian family, and they were his own daughters. Turning to everyone, the most important man of the banquet also told all the aristocrats that he is still the head of the Labian family, and he is the father of these beautiful girls who have honor and pride. To feel supportive and from the side in front of all the guests of the feast, the Duke smiled a little and asked the nearby Count Karras what he thought about this and the future of the ducal Labian family. To the protagonist's surprise, Count Karras told everyone present that in his opinion there was nothing to worry about right now, and he also said that he completely understood Duke Helios. The Count's words surprised Blizz. After his words, he walked closer to the girls to greet them. After standing in front of them, he bowed, placing his hand on their chests. He also told the main character and her sister that he was the elder of the Labian family, Count Karras. The first thing the Count turned his attention to Helena. The girl looked at her distant relative in surprise as he told her that he had seen her when she was very young and when she could not speak. Count Karras looked at the young lady with those eyes, as if he was pleased that Helena had been so brave and proud to not allow another to stain the honor of the Labian family. He said he was proud of her. These words became very pleasing to the protagonist's older sister. She lowered her eyes in embarrassment, saying that she shouldn't have had the Count praise her so much for this. At this moment, it seemed that even the sun began to shine brighter. After that, the family elder walked over to the protagonist of the story. He bent down slightly in front of her, saying that this was his first time meeting Lady Blizz. What was evident from the girl was that she didn't trust the man too much, so she looked at him disdainfully. At this point, the Earl couldn't help but think back to the moment when the heroine had shown her best character traits to resolve the conflict. He told Blizz that despite her age, she knew how to show mercy. The girl looked at the elder with a determination and fortitude that few people have at such an age. He listened to Count Karras's words that she made such good decisions that she was an example for the adults to follow. Then her entire family, consisting of Duke Helios and Sister Helena, looked at the girl with such a sincere smile, as if the heroine had truly lifted their spirits. They were truly proud of her. Count Karras, whom the protagonist continued to think of as a plain old man, continued to be affectionate, telling Blizz that he hoped she had a bright future ahead of her. But Blizz felt a certain disdain for him. But the doubts of the protagonist a little dispelled when she looked at her father, who with a smile told his daughters that, in case of his absence, they can turn to Count Karras for help. Helios put a special emphasis on the protagonist, telling her that she especially should heed those words since she was very young. Daddy's words made the girl rejoice and agree with him. However, it was really just an act of playing to the audience. When her father turned away from the protagonist, looking at someone else, she showed her real reaction, thinking why exactly she was the one who had such attention turned to her. But the whole family quickly fell silent when they noticed almost the most important guest of the party who decided to attend the banquet. They all but the Count looked at him, silent and disbelieving that it was him. The aristocrats were already shouting various words of surprise as the first prince of the empire walked towards them, who was smiling as if he truly enjoyed the increased attention towards him. It was the proud Rysal. As the intrigue passed and the main guest of the party came into the hall, a loud voice announced to everyone that this was the third imperial prince, as Rysal himself looked at Helena and Blizz as if he already knew what he was going to say to them. Rysal thought back to that moment as he walked down the hallway and caught the glances of many aristocrats and ladies. He was followed by a two-man guard as he himself walked, and thought about how everyone seemed to be surprised by his visit. The first prince of the empire looked at all those who bowed to him and kept walking. Absolutely everyone bowed to him, but he was not surprised as he was sure that he was the one who would rule the empire in the future. Because of the increased attention and respect from even the most powerful people, Rysal enjoyed his status. He laughed at everyone and thought that absolutely everyone should bow down to him. Meanwhile, the Duke, the main man of the party, had already stood directly in front of the prince to greet him. His first etiquette was to wish him that his noble steps would always be filled with glory. Helios raised his head and looked at the first prince of the empire, saying that he thanked him for his visit, calling him Your Highness. Rysal immediately recognized the person greeting him. It was Helios von Labian, the strongest mage of the continent. After the greeting, Rysal spoke first, waving his hand and saying that he was in a hurry, but he was still late. Helios told him there was nothing wrong with that, then looked at his daughters and told Rysal that they were his children. Helena was the first to greet the prince. She made a polite curtsy, taking her cloth dress in her hands and bowing to the first prince. She aristocratically said that she welcomed him to this celebration. The girl also tilted her head beautifully, saying that she was truly happy to see the prince at such a celebration, also saying that she was Helena von Labian, the eldest daughter in the ducal family. Rysal immediately paid attention to her. Rysal seemed to look at Helena with a slight sneer and arrogance. While the girl was telling him something, he was only thinking that from the looks of it, she was quite good-looking and she was even suitable for the role of his wife. But Rysal decided not to dwell on Helena alone. He moved closer to little Blizz, thinking about the fact that this was Helios's second illegitimate child. At this time, the protagonist looked at the prince as if she knew who he really was. Blizz couldn't help but curtsy. She also politely greeted the most important guest, telling him that she was the second child in the Labian family, saying her name as well and lowering her head down as a sign of respect. From Rysal, at this time, it was as if some dark aura was coming from him. He smilingly told the girls that he was very happy to see them, calling each one a young lady, but what he was really thinking about was that those who thought he wouldn't come to the feast were actually stupid and shameless. After all the girls said their names, Duke Helios told the first prince that compared to the capital, this place didn't evoke as much charm and luxury as there, for which he apologized to Rysal. But the boy said that it's not normal after all, the banquet is in honor of his birthday. After mouthing his words, Rysal even told the Duke that if Helios wanted to stay in the capital, he could help with that. At this moment, the prince's face was as if he was truly plotting something. Looking at all the quality and aristocratic furniture that was in the banquet hall, the first prince of the empire was actually thinking that if the Labian duchy, which remained neutral, supported him, he would get support from the other 4 duchies as well. Rysal continued to look at Duke Helios, thinking that it would be difficult for him to refuse such an offer. Helios continued to remain silent, realizing that with his offer, Rysal wanted to carry out some kind of plan. The small but cunning boy even held out his hand towards the Duke, pointing with his index finger to go towards him and hinting for him to agree. But as much as Rysal tried to subdue the Duke with his offer, Helios himself told him that he only thanked him for it. He then turned and told the first prince that since it was his first time here, he would now show him the mansion. When Helios asked Rysal to follow him, the boy himself looked at him with incomprehension. The first prince of the empire was unhappy that Duke Helios had left only one vague answer for his lucrative offer. This was evident on his displeased face, but he still followed him forward. The girls also looked at the first prince who was walking away after the Duke. They kept their eyes on him while Rysal himself was thinking that the Duke couldn't just refuse such an offer so easily, and he didn't believe it. In fact, if you think back to the original plot of the novel, Rysal never came to power and became heir because there was an invasion of Eastern monsters and he never returned from the war. But the one who, according to the plot of the novel, did manage to become the new emperor and king of all lands was the third prince, Mr. Eldian, who came to power due to his father's fortune. But this is only the original story. But that's not the point at all. It turns out that Eldian, who is considered one of the main characters of the original story, was very cruel and infantile, so killing Rysal was his crime. The protagonist kept looking at Rysal, realizing the fact that he and his brother Ravian died at the hands of Eldian. But at this time he was not even aware of his death, looking at Helena as if he liked her. The strange looks from the first prince couldn't help but be noticed by the protagonist. She too looked at him with contempt, not understanding who he even thought he was and why he was looking at her sister like that. However, the girl decided to take a deep breath and exhale, realizing that now it is necessary to calm down and take some action, rather than thinking about what a fool Rysal really is in real life and in the novel. Also, thanks to the novel, the protagonist already knows that the cunning and devious Rysal has already received support from Edgar, but apparently it's not enough for him if he wants support from her father, who is really influential. Blizz could only watch intently as the first prince, accompanied by her father, temporarily left the banquet to see the beauty of the castle. The heroine thought about how Rhysol needed to open his eyes soon and realized that they weren't going to be beholden to the imperial family. The protagonist couldn't even control herself with anger. Her hair rose from anger and she was gritting her own teeth. This was noticed by the girl's older sister, after which she told the heroine not to worry, as Daddy would soon come. But Daddy was not even when the banquet was long over, and the girls were already in their pajamas to lie in bed and fall asleep. The heroine, with a gift in her hands for her father, continued to worry, while Helena tried to calm the girl down with words, even though she was worried too. Even more infuriating to the protagonist was what the maid Radietta said. She came to the girls to convey Daddy's words about going to bed. This is what angered little Blizz. The main character is a little upset for the reason that she had wanted to personally give Daddy the gift she was looking at from the beginning. It was lovingly wrapped in a pink box with a beautiful bow. Her sister's silence piqued young Helena's interest, causing her to lean over to her sister with a smile and ask her what was in that box. But Blizz was not going to tell all the secrets to her older sister. The protagonist sweetly replied that she kept it strictly a secret, but if she wanted to see it so much, but Owen show her what is in the box only to her. The heroine's joy pleased Helena, which made her smile too. It turns out that in the box was a doll that the protagonist made for her dad. She looked like the Duke himself because she had blue, long hair and purple eyes. Also, the doll's head was decorated with green leaves. But when Helena saw the doll, there was a clear look of shock on her face. She looked at the homemade doll wide-eyed, telling her sister that this gift was very interesting. Blizz didn't realize what was wrong with Helena's face. In fact, the heroine realizes that the doll doesn't look like something where you can tell it's pretty, neat, and cute. This makes the girl a little embarrassed because she tried hard on her to give her to her daddy. Imagining in her head how happy her father will be with her gift, the protagonist of the story realizes that she still wants to give him this gift, the feature of which is that it is made by her hands. It turns out that in addition to the strange doll over which the girl tried hard, the box contained various shells and leaflets with drawings, which the girl also wished to present. Blizz realizes that although her family is rich, she thinks that her daddy will treasure her gifts. The girl even imagines how her father will react to her first portrait of Helios, drawn with pencils. Blizz imagines that her daddy will be confused, and she herself will be very happy about it. But while the little girl was imagining all this in her mind, she managed to get very tired. Her older sister looked at the main character with a kind smile, watching her yawning from sleepiness and fatigue. Helena decided not to be silent. Noticing Blizz's tiredness, she told her younger sister that it would be better for them to rest together now. The girl was surprised at Helena's words, clarifying with her whether they would rest together. It turns out that everything turned out as the protagonist and assumed. They went to bed together, cuddling with each other. Blizz was very happy about this, thinking about the fact that the gift for Daddy she will already give tomorrow. But the protagonist was not going to sleep and relax. The fact is that from her head still did not leave the suspicious image of the first prince. Blizz realizes that she must get rid of him because he is only a problem here. Meanwhile, Rhysol himself, accompanied by Duke Helios, was already finishing his walk around the mansion. He turned around to the nobleman, telling him that the castle was very beautiful, just like the other buildings of the Labienne family. The Duke was even more surprised by the first prince's words that he would very much like to come here more often, but it was as if something was preventing him. Helios's face showed that he didn't understand what Rhysol wanted to say. Helios decided to tell his partner directly that there was something he was not telling him. Rhysol replied with an uncertain smile, saying that he wasn't at all, although he was in some ways very guessing. While thick blue clouds formed a crimson sunset over the roof above Helios's palace, the first imperial prince was confessing to the Duke that a cold war was brewing in the imperial palace, for it was time for a generational change. Helios continued to remain calm and indifferent when Rhysol told him that bloodshed could be avoided after all, for the only way to do so was to get support from the Duke. Already imagining how he would marry Helena, who was dressed in a wedding dress and covered with a white veil, Rhysol told the Duke that he was sure that everyone would be delighted because the generation would be at peace. Polite and subtle on the subject, the first prince continued talking, asking what Helios thought about it, also telling him that if he agreed with him, then the Cold War could not even be thought of as a problem. But what was the first prince's surprise when the Duke wouldn't even listen to him, instead interrupting him by asking if he knew what society had to say about his family. While Rysal thought how dare he interrupt him, he himself looked at the Duke, understanding nothing. To Rysal's surprise, the Duke told him that the next head of Labienne would be a descendant of the Ed family, and accepting a child out of wedlock would also lower the status of the duchy. A surprised Rysal asked the Duke who dared to say such a thing. While the prince was angry, the Duke continued to think, saying, "Maul, there are those who defile his daughters, and that's why he arranged this banquet for them. And that's why, according to Helios, he decided that his family was more precious than power." The Duke's words so surprised the first prince that he was ready to be angry at Helios's insolence and his ill-manneredness. On the face of the young heir read anger, and discontent at the same time. But to the great consternation of the first prince, Helios continued talking and piercing the boy with his gaze, telling him that he understood his intentions, and he would be grateful if he would convey his wishes to Duke Ed, who could not attend his banquet. After that, Duke Helios decided to leave the disappointed and upset First Imperial Prince alone right outside, informing him that it was already quite late and he should go to bed. It turns out that the Duke was not in a hurry to attend to his business or go to bed, but to his daughters. He quietly entered their room when they were already asleep. Making the first step towards them, he was disappointed in himself, so they could not wait for him. The father of 2 daughters looked at Blizz, who was already sound asleep with her mouth open. But his attention was drawn to another object he saw next to the girl, namely a box of presents that the girl never gave him. The Duke decides to take the box for himself. He realizes that it was made for him for the reason that today is his birthday. He is very curious about what exactly the girl decided to give him in honor of the holiday. At that moment, he noticed that some leaf had fallen from the box. Picking it up, he realized that it was also for him. The main character had written a congratulatory letter beforehand, writing in it that her gift wasn't as good as her sister's, but she had made it herself, and she was looking forward to his reaction to it. For Helios, it had become the best gift ever. He stroked the sleeping protagonist's head, thinking that they were the greatest gifts to him in life that he would never miss or let go to waste. Daddy kindly covers the girls with a blanket, watching Helena and Blizz sleep sweetly together. Helios thinks about the fact that they are the only ones he has, so he won't think of them as tools of power. Meanwhile, in another duchy, Duke Henry, who has long since become the head of the family, was amusing himself with his magic. He only moved his palm, but the magic around him was already appearing like blue, acrid smoke. With just his magical abilities, he was able to raise the dart into the air without even touching it. He pointed it towards the wall with a slight smirk, about to order it to fly there. And with its sharp tip, the dart flew towards its target. It flew straight towards the dart target, about to hit the very center of it. The dart itself was also emanating the magic that Duke Edgar himself possessed. However, no matter how hard the Duke tried, he could not make the dart hit the center of the target. It didn't even hit the target itself, but hit the wall, which Henry saw and sighed heavily and disappointed. Henry continued to be amused by his magic, thinking about the fact that it had been 8 years since he had gotten it, and he still couldn't control it. He remembered the Labian family and wondered if it was true that they could control their magic. As his hand turned black with magic, he continued to talk to himself, saying that there was only one way for his plan through which he would forever be able to bring his magic under control. He remembered little Blizz, who clearly has the most unusual magic of any member of the Labian family. Henry realizes that if she inherits Labian's power and manifests it, he will immediately absorb it. Already imagining the way he does it like a venomous green snake, Heinrich realized that he would then definitely be able to control her magic, which would give him a huge pile of privileges and perks. Realizing that it all depended solely on the protagonist, Heinrich only squeezed his hand that blazed with black, uncontrollable magic, hoping that Helios's youngest daughter would grow up with this ability. The next day, the Labian family was already outside in luxurious, comfortable outfits and with their spirits lifted. The main character was waxing good about the weather because today they were having a long-awaited family picnic. All this is only thanks to the fact that Helios finally has a busy job over. The girl looked at her daddy, just thinking about it. The little family was already sitting down at the future picnic spot, having chosen a flat clearing with soft grass. The main character asked her daddy for a hug out of joy, and Helena asked her why she was being so silly. Helios was already holding the girl in his arms, hugging her and telling Helena that if she wanted, he could also hug her. The heroine also looked at her sister with kindness. Helena responded to this with a kind of disdain, saying that she was old enough for that. The girl thought that hugs were only things for very young children like Blizz. But Helena had a way out of this slightly awkward situation. She held out her palm to her dad and sister, about to tell them that she had another solution to this. Closing her eyes and showing her displeasure just because of the hug, the little girl said that if her father wanted to touch her, the best way for him to do it was to touch her hand. Just like that, the little family walked on through the grass while Helios looked at Helena with a smile. And the protagonist thought about how even though her big sister thinks she's an adult, she's still just a child. The joyful little girl continued to spout her joy, telling her daddy that today's sandwich would be incredibly delicious. Helios didn't understand his daughter's words when he asked her about it, but it didn't matter to the girl anymore. The father and daughter continued to follow Helena while the protagonist continued to sit in the arms of Helios, whom she loves and has become very attached to. The family of father and two daughters were having fun together. Helios was watching Blizz having fun with her older sister, telling Daddy to watch her learn to jump high. Helena was only telling her to do it more carefully. Helios, meanwhile, was already preparing everything for the picnic, laying out the necessary items. Behind him, the protagonist continued to have fun with her sister, telling her dad to wait for her. The main character was enjoying literally everything going on around her. She laughed and smiled with amusement, realizing that she could give love to her family in return, and she hoped it would always be that way. Turns out the family wanted to play with a ball, but when Helios threw the ball too high and too far, it went right up above the tree branches and then fell far beyond the family's playing field. But that didn't deter the main character. She had already run to the ball, telling her worried father that she would bring the ball back very quickly. Helios still shouted after her to be careful. After that, the girl continued walking across the grass after the ball, wondering if she was already far away and if her father was worried about her now. But she was still going to bring him the lost ball. As it turned out, the ball they were playing with had fallen into the lake, which for some reason was very dark. The water in it had not a simple color, but a blue-purple hue, which was a little strange. The main character was able to notice a ball that was floating on the water. She was already walking towards it, not noticing that the sky had also darkened sharply, but just now they were playing with the ball under a clear sky. Despite all this, the girl touched the ball and was about to walk back, telling herself that she had found it. The water in which the ball was floating was still a strange black color. When the girl was about to go to her daddy, she couldn't help but notice the fact that there was suddenly a strong wind, which was very strange. Blizz also noticed that there were trees growing around the scary lake, but they didn't have any leaves. What scared the girl even more was that she heard a scary, distinct voice, one that told her to come this way. The heroine was frightened. Blizz walked closer to the water, still hearing the strange voice and thinking that someone was calling her. As the scary magic waited for the moment to attack the defenseless protagonist, a pink cloud appeared in front of her and shouted to her that it would protect her from evil. Blizz was shocked that a piece of her magic had decided to sacrifice her life just to save her from the insidious sorcery. The girl screamed exhaustedly for the cloud as it continued to fight for her sake against the evil magic. It was trying so hard to protect the protagonist that it was angry while Blizz lay on the grass in fear. Suddenly, the protagonist of the story notices a suspicious tree that seemed to have a strange magic emanating from it. She realizes that at one point a strong wind blew, everything around her became dark, and this tree seemed to be calling her for sure. Meanwhile, the girl's father was already looking for the protagonist everywhere. He shouted her name and called her to him, but she did not answer, which alarmed Helios. He was getting more and more worried about her because he realized that something was wrong. But he didn't have to look for long. He found her rather quickly near the tree in the lake, noticing the fact that Blizz was lying on the ground, calling out for her daddy in response. At that moment, it was as if Helios felt a light that eased his excitement. Helios was able to quickly get to the main character to find out what had happened and provide help. Blizz immediately told her daddy that she had witnessed something strange, which the worried daddy interrogated her about. The Duke immediately turned to the mysterious tree, realizing that this was what his daughter was talking about. He too had seen it emitting a strange energy. Helios, as an experienced mage, was able to quickly realize that it was devilish energy. The father of the protagonist took his daughter in his arms, not taking his eyes off the tree. He thinks that his maid, Radietta, was right when she said that the devil's omen is so strong that it penetrates through the protective magic. To reassure his daughter, Helios stroked her hair, thinking that the protective seal had definitely weakened, and if that was the case, that Blizz, who sees this, would have to seal the devil and save everyone. Helios then decided to seal the place himself so that the magic of the demons would not penetrate the world. While he was casting his sorcery, he made a vow to himself that the heroine would not have to fight this alone, and he would protect her to the end. The main character was touched by her daddy's words when he looked her in the eyes and promised he would always be there for her. This made Blizz amused and look at him with sincere, happy eyes. After this strange incident, the family decided not to discuss it. They had a quiet picnic and then returned to the castle, where Helena tried on her brooch while the heroine of the story told her whether or not it fit crookedly. Helena corrected her jewelry on her hair, after which Blizz told her sister that it looked very pretty and dainty on her now. Helena was pleased by the little girl's words, for which she told her thank you. The little girl continued to tell her sister that the star brooch suited her very well and complemented her image, which made Helena embarrassed, telling Blizz thank you and for choosing to give her such a gift. Blizz continued to have fun with her sister, telling her that she bought the jewelry with her first pocket money. But it wasn't really, because it was a protective artifact to protect Helena from the magic of demons. The girl couldn't help but remember the moment when she saw her daddy's face after the magic tree incident. He had told her that time that there was nothing wrong with it, but after looking at his emotions, Blizz realized that it was far from true. The protagonist decided to secure her sister first for the reason that she herself already had a cloud that protected her from dark magic, although she didn't recall such a thing in the original novel. The heroine only had to watch her overjoyed sister, who thought it was just a piece of jewelry. Blizz is glad that she guesses she is defenseless and has a strong support in the form of her family. But the children's time in the room and their fun was interrupted by a man who appeared behind the main character of the story. He said, as he expected, Blizz was not so stupid. These words made the girl turn around. While Helena, Blizz, and Helios were sitting on the soft sofas, a girl stood next to them and told them that this stiletto was a magical ore with a 6th-class defense spell. Just from the expert's words alone, the two girls were surprised. Even the heroine herself was shocked, because she didn't know about it before. The fact is that items with 5th and 6th class enchantment are very good at protecting against evil. The girl, who is clearly an expert in stones, even turned to the Duke to tell the girls that Helios himself could confirm that this stone was not genuine. Helios did indeed say that it was a 6th grade spell. Helena was a little embarrassed by the slight deception on her sister's part. She embarrassingly corrected the stiletto on her face, while the heroine insisted that she wear it everywhere even more. Helena replied that she would do just that. While the girls were talking, the protagonist's cloud that protected her from everything was already coming up with something. Because of the new idea, it was as if the cotton candy had a companion on her head signaling important things. The pink cloud decided to fly closer to Blizz, telling her to get such an item as well. Blizz was surprised to ask the flying cotton candy why she needed it, when it protected her better than any rocks. But the girl didn't argue about it with the cloud, after all. She turned to the girl who is an expert in this and asked her to give her the same item, pointing her finger at it. The girl wasn't surprised by the main character's request, so she immediately decided to offer her something. She showed Blizz an object with a piece of jewelry that was blue in color. The girl said that it was also a rare item made of magical ore. It was the kind of item that Cloud was grabbing for. When the girl offered it to the heroine, it hissed, telling her to be sure to take it, because it was perfect for defense against dark magic. But the protagonist still had her doubts, which she told the Cloud. Then it answered her that this is the perfect item because if the mage injects his mana here, this thing will turn into a weapon that can break through any metal. After saying that, the girl took the strange object in her hands, examining it from all sides. She was very curious as to how it would protect her. but she trusted the cloud's words more than her own doubts. As she continued to consider the object in her hand, the girl realized that even if she lost it, she would be able to find it almost always, which was a very good feature. Blizz decided that she would take it. After she made the decision to take the strange but necessary item with her, Blizz turned to the strange item vendor and told her that she was taking it, then asked how she got it. The girl replied that she had labored a long time for it. The girl didn't pepper the girl with questions, complimenting her by saying that at first she just wanted the artifact and ended up getting something more. To this, the blonde-haired girl replied that she had gone to the right person. The castle maid decided to sit on the couch, saying that in that case she was very happy to be of service. She then asked the protagonist if she could keep secrets so well. The mademoiselle with blonde hair and unusual ears continued to look at Blizz, asking her if she was ever tired of hiding things from her father. The lady is an honorary jeweler, and her name is Biella. In fact, Biella is an elf, and she, like many other elves, has an unusual ability that allows them to see a person's soul, that is, their true essence. Thanks to this, Biella learned that Blizz was hiding a lot of things from her father. Also, thanks to the fact that Biella is a pure-blooded elf, she was able to recognize the identity of the main character in the story of the novel without any problems, which could do only her and no one else. In the novel, Biella, who liked different interesting things, became interested in Bella, the protagonist of the novel, who was not like her, then used her connections to make her the queen of society. Knowing this beforehand, the twin realized that if Biella got on her side, she would be very successful in everything. Realizing this, she had asked Papa several POW years ago to bring Biella to Labien to see her. Helios had been very surprised by this at the time, for at that age children were usually interested in something more simple and childish. And so, when the little protagonist was already running to Biella, who was in the carriage, she was sure that the elfess would support her in everything for only one elementary reason. The girl remembered the way Biella had greeted Blizz with a smile and kindness when she had first seen the heroine's soul. Blizz knew that she would be kind to her for the reason that she herself was very much like the kind in everything main character. Returning to the present, the elf girl Biella herself was already chatting wordlessly with the heroine of the story, telling her that she had grown a lot since they last met a couple years ago. The girl continued to clutch Blizz in her arms as if she were her own sister or daughter. The heroine couldn't even think that she would become so attached to Biella. She answered her by saying that it was really sad that she had grown up. At one point, the protagonist moved away from Biella, who constantly wanted to hug her, then asked her how her one thing was going. Biella only sighed, saying that such cold-bloodedness towards her made her very upset. Blizz's requests caused the elfess to pull out of her pockets the very card the girl had stolen from the butler's office the day he was fired. Biella said she had trouble learning more about it, but she had learned how to use it. The heroine refreshed her memory, remembering that she had found this Information Guild card in the butler's room 7 years ago, but she never used it because she didn't even know what it was for. But what the heroine did know was that if this Information Guild fell under Henry's power, things would be worse. The girl herself asked Biella about this card because she knew that this girl travels a lot, collecting all kinds of information about people and what they do. And because of that, the protagonist was able to learn from Biella that the head of the guild accepts people with these cards whenever there is a full moon. Blizz realized that her work had paid off. The girl kept reading the card while Biella told her that the full moon was just today and the next one wouldn't be until a month later, which was very late for the heroine of the story. Biella also told her that it was only possible to see the chapter at a special place. The little girl immediately began to think about how she could realize her plan. She remembered that the problem was that it was necessary to get through the Labian barrier, which was very difficult. But the protagonist also realized that even without that, she might have problems. She realizes that she is still just a child of 7, so everyone might have a lot of questions about who she is and what she wants. Realizing that it would be very hard for her, she looked at her colleague Biella a little confused, asking her what to do in such a case. But the cheerful elf replied that she had already thought of everything. The kind girl told the protagonist that she already had a whistle with a teleporter that would make her move to the place where the meeting was specified, and also had a ring that would magically change her appearance. Biella explained to the all-presenting Blizz that if she wears this ring, she will look like an adult, but the problem is that it was just an illusion, and in reality, her body would still be her own. The girl thanked her friend for being so helpful, and then tilted her head down, looking at all the objects. At this time, her father and Helena were no longer around, and the heroine was thinking about finally being able to meet with the Information Guild. The protagonist continued to stare even harder at the business card in her hands, realizing the fact that their very valuable information would help her better protect the Labian family, something she had dreamed of since she was a child. Blizz would have continued to think about her own thoughts if it wasn't for Biella sitting next to her, asking her why she didn't ask her father about it instead of traveling such a huge distance. As the girl sat on the soft couch and listened to her partner, Biella told her that her father would have been able to find out anything she would have asked him at any time. Biella didn't understand why she was taking such a risk. To the experienced jeweler's surprise, the protagonist replied, mauling that a normal 7-year-old child wouldn't even ask such a thing. Biella looked at the heroine as if she understood all her judgments. Clenching the fabric on her dress into fists, the girl also said that Biella, unlike everyone else, can see souls and she knows about being reborn, due to which she accepts her as such. Blizz admitted to her friend that in the case of her parents and relatives, they wouldn't have understood her, thinking that she's just some kind of different person. This makes the heroine of the story a little upset. The excited girl continued to tell Biella her worries about how it was likely that the swarmers would be scared of her power or think she was fake. But at this time, the pixie's palm was already behind Blizz's back to hug her tightly. Hugging the little heroine of the story as if she were her youngest daughter, Biella told Blizz not to talk such nonsense. After all, Helios and Helena will always love her just the way she is. To reassure Blizz even more, Biella told her that she could take her word for it and not even think about it anymore, because she could see her soul and already knew that everything would be exactly as she said. Her friend's sincere words cheered the girl up. She felt that Biella had become closer to her and related to her, causing her to say her name sweetly. Blizz was very grateful to her for always helping her. The girls continued to talk sweetly on a variety of topics, and Biella continued to encourage Blizz in everything to take it easy. Sensing this, the girl realized that she also wanted to help her in some way in return. At that moment, she remembered the original plot of the story, where Biella had bonded with the red-haired protagonist of the novel in the same way, crying with her. Remembering this, Blizz wondered if things would be this good if these events happened 10 years from now. Blizz looked at Biella with a smile, thinking about the fact that she would help her after all. Since she knows the plot ahead of time, she'll give her a little clue at the end about the person she's looking for. Meanwhile, in the other duchy, the days were also passing slowly and quietly. The sky was clear and blue, illuminating the beautiful architecture of another castle that was far away from the main character's home. One guy, who was surprisingly very similar to Biella in hair color and eyes, was shouting, apparently calling out to find someone. The guy had an unusual short braid of hair flaunting in his face. It turns out the clerk was calling out to someone who was sitting under a tree reading a book. He told the golden-haired boy that he couldn't just ignore him, because he accompanied him everywhere. This boy was Fabian von Gold, who was the direct heir of the Gold family. He continued to calmly read a book, shouting to his subordinate that he was late with his work. But the little gentleman still decided to get up from the roots of the tree, tiredly asking his guard if it was his fault that he couldn't keep up. The blonde-haired knight was a little hurt by these words, as if he was the only one to blame for this. A boy named Fabian is very unusual for the reason that in the story everyone says that he was born with a blessing from the spirits, and therefore he and his family have supernatural powers that allow them to get rich without doing anything. The pigtailed boy kept looking at his master, thinking that Fabian was also born with such a trait, so he would have several times less problems than the others. However, in reality, the children of the Gold family were not the angels they were mistakenly believed to be because of their appearance. Suddenly, out of the blue, Fabian reprimanded his subordinate, saying that he was talking too much. After that, the boy went to the guy, whose name was Elaine, as usual, saying that he had already read everything that was written in the book, and now he might get bored. Because of this, he asked Elaine what he should do now. Elaine decided to lift the boy into his arms and then offered him to listen to a story about another duchy that was near them. This immediately interested the boy, so he did not turn out. The subaltern who carried the boy in his arms came to an empty bench, while Fabian told him it was time to tell him about the Duchy of Labian, for he had already heard everything else. Elaine said he would tell him about the family in that case. After everyone sat down on the bench, under the servant's narration, Fabian began to introduce the Labian family as Elaine told him that the Duke's 2 daughters showed up at the banquet, and even though the second girl was born out of wedlock, there seemed to be a warm relationship between the sisters, and the Duke took care of them as well. With a slight laugh, Elaine continued to say that now not much is known about this family, but now everyone is just talking about this family. But Fabian was interested in how the second daughter of Helios could remain so calm, and he asked the servant about it. But Elaine was shocked when Fabian calmly told him that she, that is, the main character, an illegitimate girl, was useless in the family if she didn't recognize her. A look of shock appeared on the servant's face. To Elaine's surprise, the boy spoke of it as calmly as if it were a matter of course. Fabian even explained his words, saying that if someone is useless, then they don't deserve love. He said that was something his father told him. Because of this, Elaine couldn't help but think of the boy's father, Duke Adolf von Gold, who clearly liked to abuse his children. The boy realizes that such things should definitely not be said to his children. Elaine also realized that the father was hinting to the boy that he only valued in him the fact that he had the ability to bring wealth. He looked at Fabian and realized that it was definitely not his fault, but his upbringing. To ease the awkwardness a bit, Elaine asked the boy if he wanted to ask the protagonist about it personally, but to this, Fabian again replied that his daddy wouldn't let him date outside of marriage, as if it would stain his luck at being rich. In order to calm the boy, Elaine decided to put his hand on his shoulder and tell him that he should not listen to everyone and take everyone's word for it, but should learn to draw his own conclusions and learn from them. So Elaine and Fabian continued to sit on the bench, talking about all sorts of things that interested each of them. The shade from the tree saved them from the sun's rays as they chatted together. Elaine looked at the boy and thought that the truth of the matter might be quite different in life, because there were rumors that the changes in the duchy were due to the second child. But Elaine himself could not understand one simple thing. Imagining the smile of the main character, who is almost the kindest in the world, he thought about whether this girl could make Fabian's mangled heart change. The guy even allowed himself to imagine the way Fabian himself is embarrassed and ashamed of himself, standing right in front of Blizz, who turned out to be completely different from what his father told him. Elaine is sure that this girl will make his heart beat faster. Meanwhile, in the central temple of the Riaz Empire, interesting things were also happening. In the very center of the temple, the oracle that determines the future of the continent was passing away, that is, dying. A subordinate who was standing next to the Great Lord was already anxiously and excitedly trying to tell him that this meant something very terrible, connected with the awakening of evil. The Great Lord could already sense that great changes were coming. Sweat dripped down his face as he thought about the fact that he had to urgently inform the continent's emperor, because he knows that when the darkness consumes the light and the chosen child defies the evil, the demon himself will appear. Because of this, the Great Lord urgently told his subordinate to notify the emperor that they absolutely must find the child of prophecy, lest it be too late. The servant said that he would do it right away. The fact is that the child of prophecy possesses the most extraordinary abilities, making it the only one capable of challenging the devil himself. Thanks to the predictions, everyone already knows that such a child will be born in the Labian family, but there is one nuance. The nuance is that even if the temple and its followers have long known what family the Savior will be born into, they will still have a hard time finding him, even using magic and secrecy. The subordinate with a trembling hand was already writing a letter to the emperor about the child of prophecy, while all the worried ministers were thinking about the fact that the entire Labian family was scattered all over the map, so it would be difficult to find that one child. And it was for this reason that when the emperor of the Riaz continent, Lathius Inno Riaz himself, read the letter from the sacred temple, he decided that the imperial family would arrange a meeting with each and every one of the Labienne family. When the emperor did receive the letter from the high-ranking temple, he read it and afterward put it on the table, without stopping to ponder about the demon king and his existence. His blue eyes seemed to dim as he guessed that most likely the myths of his existence were considered the very real truth that now threatened their lives. Already visualizing the child of the prophecy, the emperor thought about the fact that he had actually known this information for a long time because the legend had been passed down in his family for generations. The story that there should be a child of prophecy that would fight back against the demon had been passed down from hand to hand, like the same emperor's crown and power in the empire, to everyone in turn. However, imagining a certain green flag that symbolized the Ed family, the emperor pondered that because of the contradictions in the Labian family, he didn't even think that a devil opponent would appear in their family. But the emperor, while imagining in his mind and hand with Henry's magic, also did not forget about one important detail that everyone misses when considering only the child of prophecy and the family he would be born into. Imagining in his mind how the already adult Helena was facing the crucial responsibility for the safety of everyone in the continent, the emperor didn't forget that the one who would bring the demon into this world would also be from the Labian family. Even when the emperor was already in bed and drinking water, he couldn't understand why the one who would bring the demon into this world and the one who would escape it were in the same family, which was very strange from the outside. The emperor's thoughts thickened as he continued to look at the interior of his bedroom and thought about the fact that this story had been passed down from generation to generation, so he believed that the truth could no longer be known. But since the prediction of the Demon King's rebirth had been granted, everything had changed. Looking at his reflection in the cup of water, the emperor realized that, for better or worse, everything that had been said about the Labian family was beginning to seem true. Because of his worries and thoughts about what happened, the emperor decided to put the cup of water on the tray, realizing that only finding the child of the prophecy could enhance and accelerate the rebirth of the Demon King, which is terrible. Looking at his room where the emperor was alone with his thoughts, he realized the fact that the child who would be the devil's assistant would also make some kind of revival contract, which was also bad for the continent. Toward the set, the emperor was also curious. He looked at the teacup and teapot that had an exquisite white and blue coloring, thinking that he couldn't be indifferent to this situation because it concerned everyone. The emperor immediately remembered his first eldest son, Rysal, who can't really stand up for himself, using all sorts of tricks for his own victory, trying to get support everywhere. Feeling the contrast, the emperor also remembered his third son, Eldian, who had recently told him bluntly that he would very soon find out about his demonic sword and his grand plans. While his son's eyes were filled with apparent madness and lust for power, the emperor listened to his words, saying he should fake his disappearance and wait. Eldian also admitted that his brother could not be trusted, even if it was his child. Because of all this commotion, the continent's emperor was thinking that so many speeches about the demonic sword were tiring him a lot, and taking over the empire by his sons was too hasty a decision. With these thoughts, the emperor himself got out of bed, strutting around the room with the red cloth and looking at the tulips in the vase. He thought about the fact that the most important thing now was to find the child of the prophecy, because that would help avoid problems in the future. The emperor decided that he needed to send word to the temple, thinking that the truth would cause great havoc in the society, so he should gather the members of the Labian family so that no one would know the truth. Meanwhile, the protagonist was already able to use the whistle and get to the teleportation point while magic reigned beneath her feet. Blizz herself was wearing beautiful shoes, saying that everything went perfectly. The heroine realized that the large ring made her really look like an adult instead of a 7-year-old girl, which pleased her and also pleased the cloud next to her. The girl was so happy with her magic that she did not notice how, because of it, went through a passing man, whom Iabila pushed out of the way. The heroine thought about the fact that this way no one would recognize her. The man who did notice something wrong turned to the protagonist, not realizing what it was, but Blizz was already hiding her appearance behind her cape so that there would be fewer questions for her. After As the girl left the man, she removed the hood from her head, realizing the fact that she had to be extremely careful because the bracelet only changes her appearance, creating an illusion. The protagonist decided to hurry, passing by various barrels and carts in the alley. Blizz thought about how she had best hurry, as Henry could already force them to submit to him. Taking off her hood, she peered at everything she saw, realizing that she should conspire with the Information Guild to get all the information. With those thoughts in mind, she continued walking. Clenching her palm into a fist, she also remembered that she was only doing all this to get the Information Guild on her side, so that they would not be able to obey Henry, and she would be able to get the information she needed, for example about Fabian's mine. She adjusted her bag on her body, also warning herself that in the original, Henry had taken advantage of the Guild's weaknesses and took control of them, and he was a terrible person for taking the opportunity to make threats. Keeping her bag firmly on her shoulder, she continued to walk towards the appointed place, telling herself that that wasn't what was important right now, but how to get to the guild meeting place as quickly as possible on the full moon. But when the protagonist got to the guild meeting place and sat down leaning against the wall, Blizz waited for the guild for a very long time, not understanding why she was delayed so long, what was making her wait. Just because of this, the protagonist anxiously looked at the business card she had found from the beginning, not understanding why she was sitting and waiting for everyone. She doesn't believe that Biella was wrong somewhere, just as she didn't believe that the guild wouldn't come to her. The lonely girl looked around as the cloud continued to fly near her, causing the heroine to suggest that perhaps she should look around, as the meeting place with the guild might be different. With such thoughts, Blizz walked through the alleys without a hood on her head, while all the locals looked at her as if they had truly never seen girls like her in reality. The little, actually defenseless girl would pass by not very friendly because of their appearance, which was very awful, as if they had been living on the streets for a long time. The protagonist would have continued walking further down the street and looking for the true meeting place, if it wasn't for a strange feeling that made her stop. The girl already wanted to turn back around. As expected, she turned back because she felt something strange in the opposite direction that beckoned her. She realized that she owed it to herself to go there and find out what it was. As she crept closer to the place she was interested in, the girl noticed something that several people were clearly mocking someone. She heard someone clearly telling someone to surrender in a forced tone. The protagonist noticed that the gang of bullies were not just bullying a passerby, but a little boy. He stood there with his head down while all the men around him told him he couldn't get out of here. Blizz was already thinking about how she could help the poor boy who had the misfortune to find himself in this place. But while she was thinking of a plan, she noticed that the boy himself was smiling suspiciously wide. The heroine of the story was very surprised. Noticing that the boy had white hair with blue eyes, which she saw from under his hood, she immediately realized who it was, because of which she was truly amazed. Due to some fear and shock, she even hid behind the wall of the house, not knowing what to do. She was very confused, not understanding how they could meet here and why fate brought them here at the wrong time. But while the protagonist was worried and didn't know what to do, the boy she knows, who showed everyone his sly smile, already wanted to act. He told the offending boys that only they were in danger now, not him. Through his voice and manner of speech, Blizz firmly realized that the man standing before her was Eldian Shen Riaz, the third prince and pretender to the emperor's throne. In the original novel, he is the protagonist who will lead Helena down the road of evil and bring disaster and ruin upon the Labian family. In fact, Eldian is the one the protagonist least expected to see, especially at such an inopportune time. She became even more worried, not realizing what she should do in such a case. Still, the girl decided not to take any chances. She quietly got up from her seat and walked in the other direction, thinking that she needed to leave as soon as possible, before anyone from that company noticed her and did not do something bad. But as it turned out, that wasn't all. While Blizz believed she could leave quietly, Eldian spoke as if he could see her. He told someone if he thought he didn't know you were hiding something. The bullies didn't understand the question, so they asked the boy what he was saying. The bandits told the teenager not to bullshit them or bullshit them, but Eldian only let out his caustic red magic in response, causing the men to shut up. He said he wasn't talking to them at the time. While the bandits were getting their necks slapped because of their manners and rude behavior, Eldian went to where the main character was. He even turned his head, asking her where she was going with such haste. The little boy even took off his hood, appearing before the protagonist without it and showing his slight but sly grin as if he knew her secrets and real intentions. With his hand, the boy made Blizz remove his hood as well. Out of surprise, the protagonist turned to him with surprised eyes as Eldian continued to ask her if she was the assassin her brother had hired. But when the third prince realized who stood before him now, he was stunned. He had thought until the last moment that it was an ordinary villager or local who wanted to harm him, but in no way a beautiful, frightened girl. The protagonist was just as surprised. She looked at him with surprised eyes and with a kind of fear that she had been exposed. She doesn't know what she will do next because just now, Eldian saw the real her, without the magic and illusion of an adult. Eldian still did not miss the heroine's hand. He held it as if he wouldn't let Blizz escape so easily if she wanted to. Perplexed by what was happening, he asked what she was doing here while the girl couldn't recover from the shock. To find out what was going on with Eldian and what made him come to this alleyway after running into the bullies, you have to find out what happened about an hour ago when the boy was wandering around town and looking up at the sky. He looked up at the sky with the stars and also looked around as many times as he needed to make sure he wasn't being followed. He walked to the designated place to meet with the head of the guild. Eldian needed the information guild needed in order to learn all the secrets of the empire the guild kept with them. To meet with the head, he tore up a business card to then throw it on the ground for a ritual. As soon as the torn business card fell to the floor, a strange man with long red hair and a bunny mask on his face appeared in front of the boy. The suspicious man said he was very happy to meet the boy. In addition to the masked man magically appearing in front of him, Eldian also noticed that the place around him had changed. He was no longer standing outside, but was in the office, most likely the bunny man himself. When the third prince of the empire asked the masked man if he was the head of the information guild, the man nodded approvingly. The boy continued to stare at his colleague and marvel that the head looked so young. However, Eldian quickly calmed his thoughts on the supposed age of the guild head, realizing that if a person was doing their job well, age was unimportant. Glancing at the desk, Eldian said, getting to the point. The boy looked determinedly at his interlocutor and told him that he wished to fake his disappearance. He added to his words that he wanted everyone to believe it, then asked if it was possible. The head of the guild answered briefly. He raised his hand, pointing his index finger at his head and telling the boy that it was not easy at all, as you would have to interact with the memories. Eldian clenched his hand into a fist when, after so many unnecessary words, the guild leader told him that his plan was quite realistic and everyone would be able to believe that he had disappeared. That was just what the boy needed. Suddenly, Eldian was deep in his thoughts. He remembered himself in the expensive suit and realized that now that he could use the power of the demonic sword, he wasn't completely sure he wouldn't go insane. Picturing the magic and light seals in his head, Eldian realizes that it takes a lot of training to learn how to wield the sword, but Helios has promised to help him with that. He also knows that he must see the training through to keep his sanity, for Labian's cleansing magic can temper the demonic sword's energy. Eldian's game is like a game of cards where you can both win and lose at the snap of a finger. He remembers that the training period lasts less than 3 years, and he is going to get the demon sword for that. Eldian can't forget his father, who was recently troubled by other news. He remembers looking at him thinking that he didn't want to stand out from the beginning, so he decided to fake his disappearance. Coming back to the present, the guy realized the fact that his disappearance wouldn't be that difficult. If you do a trick with people's memories, but the only problem is that only the Information Guild can help with this. Meanwhile, the head of the guild himself had already told his client that the more people who were hard to reach, the higher the price and the favor would be. But Eldian isn't intimidated by the price or the money spent. When the guild leader told his interlocutor that he didn't think a client like Eldian could have money problems, Eldian himself laughed as if agreeing with that and asked the head if he knew who he was. To this, the guild master replied that if someone who earns from information doesn't know something, such a person can't be trusted. Also, the guild master suddenly said that Eldian's request would be fulfilled by a specified date. But when the guild master said that this was the end of their conversation, Eldian was surprised and indignant, so that an emotion of real shock appeared on his face. There was no way he had expected this. Because of the guild leader's sudden decision, the boy became furious, shouting at him to at least wait for him a bit or listen to him, but by this time it was too late to say anything. Because the guild leader was already saying goodbye to Eldian, looking him in the eyes through his mask and telling him that they were grateful to him for appreciating their abilities. But the boy had not expected the conversation to end so abruptly. Eldian's eyes even lit up with anger, turning from blue to red. He stared like that at the guild leader until the place around him turned back into an alleyway. The master had told him that they were unlikely to meet in real life anymore. All Eldian had to do was watch as the guild leader deftly jumped onto the fence, bowing to him and saying thank you for using their services. After that, the guild master mysteriously disappeared. The boy stared at the trail of magic that was left behind after the guild master disappeared before his eyes. He remained silent and thought about how he still wanted to win the guild head over to his side, even with the use of force. But did he really rush into it? The boy's gaze became even more serious as he began to guess something. He wondered aloud if the guild leader had already made a deal with someone if he was acting so strange and suspicious. The white-haired, serious guy could only remember the office where he had talked to the guild leader and thought about how he really wanted to run the guild, but couldn't because of the lack of demonic sword power. Covering his face with his hand and fixing his snow-white hair, he thought that now he should go back to Helios and solve the issues about the demon sword without thinking about the guild anymore. The boy decided to make this decision because there wasn't much he could do about the Information Guild right now, but he had to make sure that it didn't fall under the control of Ed, who was like a snake, swallowing everyone into his hungry mouth. Eldian wanted to calmly go about his business, holding his head, but then he heard the very hooligans who decided to harass him to rob or beat him up, but the guy remained calm. The whole situation made him laugh. He grinned evilly at all the thugs who think they are the strongest, telling them that it was all so funny to him that he was even surprised. Lowering his hand and looking at all the bullies in front of him, the boy said that no one even lets him take a breath, not leaving him alone for a moment. This is when his dark blue magic began to take effect. It was at this time that the boy was noticed by the protagonist, who, from the beginning, just wanted to see what was going on in that alley. While Eldian looked at the bandits as if they were pawns, she angrily followed him with her eyes. And when the third prince did find the protagonist rushing to flee the scene, she pretended not to be surprised or shocked, though she was actually panicked, angry at the fact that he had given her away and kept her from leaving. Plus, when Blizz thought back to their first awkward meeting when Eldian had held her hand, she resented his behavior, not understanding why he was talking to her as if they were longtime acquaintances. The pair stood on the street, away from the bandits. Blizz wanted to just walk away, thinking that she would deal with everything else later, but Eldian was keeping up with her. And besides, she noticed the bandits moving closer to them. The whole group was looking at the boy, telling him he knew who they were, so he should be afraid. The men were acting so arrogant that they didn't notice that the boy in front of them was not just a boy, but the third imperial prince. Eldian had the same confidence in himself and his strength. He looked at the bandits, asking them if they had heard his warning before, or if they were completely deaf in both ears. The third prince continued to speak, telling the ruffians that they were certainly unaware of his strength and capabilities if they continued to climb. At this time, the heroine of the story clutched her bag excitedly, realizing that she had to run. But just when the protagonist was ready to run from this place with all her might, Eldian turned to her and asked her with incomprehension what she was doing here, and if she even knew what this place was. The boy went on to say that even though she was protected, he still wouldn't believe that she was so fearless. Such words made the protagonist feel bad, because now she was being told off by someone she was seeing for the first time in her life. However, after that, it was no joke. Eldian instantly turned to the bullies, because he heard a strange and sharp sound, similar to the fact that they were already ready to attack them for robbery using knives. With the help of his magic, Eldian knocked away from himself and the protagonist a sword with a long and sharp blade, which flew towards them with all his might, and which was thrown at them by the main one of the hoodlums, who clearly did not like the boy's behavior. When the other ruffians also pulled out their daggers, the leader of their pack, who kept looking at Eldian and smiling as if the boy was defenseless, told him to relax and stop paying attention to them. Blizz worried even more, sensing that the conflict was beginning to escalate into a real fight. She stood behind Eldian and couldn't calm down while the boy answered them, saying that he thought they were just losers. But he was wrong. Suddenly one of the bullies yelled at Eldian, asking him what he had just said. This startled the protagonist, making her jerk, and the boy put his hand in front of her, telling her to stand because it was dangerous. What surprised Blizz even more was that after that, Eldian turned to her and calmly said he didn't know why he saved her at all. The heroine was surprised that this guy again speaks to her as if they were friends. From this, the protagonist of the story clutched her backpack even more tightly. It embarrassed her, though in her head she kept thinking why she should tolerate it. Meanwhile, Eldian tells the bandits that there is an end to their chatter. The boy continued to defend Blizz, covering her with his arm while the bandits told him that they would chop off his head, not bothering much for him because the customer who ordered this murder from them really wants him dead. The chief of the gang talked to the children as if he already knew he was going to win and could cut off Eldian's head. But when he said that he supposedly felt genuinely sorry for the girl behind the kid, he didn't notice the sharp blade of the dagger flying past his head. Absolutely every one of the bullies was startled. They didn't expect to see a cold weapon heading in their direction, but unfortunately or fortunately, it didn't hit anyone. The ringleader asked everyone what it was. Turns out it was the protagonist who decided to take matters into her own hands. She smiled at the bullies just like Eldian, telling them that now she didn't want to see pity on their faces. The girl was angry at them for mentioning her in their conversations as well, saying that they would supposedly twist her head off too. But Blizz didn't give up, smiling at her rivals and telling them that they wouldn't get her head that easily. But that wasn't all. The bullies were stunned when they saw that the protagonist could control the dagger through magic, forcing it back into her hands. While the knife was making cracks in the stone, she told them that she would give them one piece of advice. At this point, the girl thought for a moment. She realizes that the main character is with her now, so nothing bad will happen to her at any rate. But at the same time, she remembered that she really doesn't like to risk her life for other people, because in past lives it didn't cost anything. Meanwhile, the girl continued to show the bandits her confidence by juggling her dagger and telling them that she would give them one last chance before ending it. Eldian was just as shocked as the hoodlums. What the girl sees fleetingly is that Eldian is surprised by her character and courage. The girl realizes that even though in all her other lives her risks to people have been unnecessary, she decides that this time it is her duty to help Eldian. Eldian himself also activated his red, dangerous magic while the girl continued to pretend that she was capable of dealing with everything on her own. She waved her dagger, and the boy curiously asked her if she could fight, to which the heroine told him not to ruin her image. In fact, Eldian's question was apropos. The protagonist remembered that when she was learning to throw a dagger, she got into trouble, but now, fortunately, she is helped by a cloud, giving her great strength. It was because of her thoughts that the girl remembered the cloud. She noticed that it had suddenly disappeared somewhere. In addition, her heart became suspiciously quiet, as if afraid of something. However, the protagonist did not even expect that right now she got the answers to all her questions. She noticed that right in front of her eyes appeared red smoke, which is the magic of Eldian. The girl looked carefully at her hand, realizing that it was what she thought it was. It turned out to be Eldian magic, which was so strong and corrosive that it frightened the cloud, silencing it. In an instant, as the girl touched her hand to Eldian's, she herself didn't notice how her magical illusion that made her over-adult faded away. She had returned to her body without even realizing it. But Eldian, as one of the most experienced mages on the continent, couldn't help but notice that something had changed. A clear shock appeared on his face when he sensed the strong magic from the protagonist. He instantly turned back around, looking at Blizz with blue eyes, not realizing what was happening. Eldian couldn't even string two words together, trying to ask the protagonist what she had just done. What he saw made him marvel even more than before. The boy noticed perfectly how the magic was no longer working on the girl, showing her real young face, not an adult. Awakening the boy's incredible interest and shock, Blizz made him turn around completely, whereupon he asked the girl once more how she had just done it. Blizz, who had reverted back to her adult version, answered the boy by mauling him, not knowing what he meant. But the thugs weren't about to wait for the pair to finish their conversation. One of them instantly released a dagger, which flew towards the heroes and hit the wall of the house without hitting them. The knife stuck firmly in the stone wall of the house, causing Eldian and the heroine to turn around to the bullies again, as if asking what they wanted. The main one was already freaking out, asking the boy and girl how dare they look down on them. The man in the stealthy hood called the children real cocky, promising that they would immediately pay for their levity and arrogance in front of them. Immediately afterward, the same bully unleashed his sword at the protagonist, causing it to fly toward the girl's face with the sharp blade forward. But Blizz dodged the blow, stepping aside a bit. One of the masked bandits wanted to hit the heroine in the face with his fist, but she dodged it this time, giving the gang more trouble and making them doubt their victory. However, the quick and agile girl continued to dodge all the blows to her side like a true professional. He's such a one the girl's bangs even rose upwards. The masked man wanted to use his dagger on the girl, but even this he could not do, because between him and the heroine appeared Eldian, who was already directing his magic at the bandit. When all the bullies saw that with one blow the pair was able to throw one opponent away from them, they realized that they were being played with. Not only that, the heroes acted together without saying a word, as if they understood each other without it. All of the assassins looked intently into the eyes of the children, whose gaze was determined and belligerent. They nodded to each other, signaling to themselves that they would have to proceed with extreme caution, infuriated over this whole situation in which they were being won over by some little kids. The chief among the bandits shouted to the others to attack them in a crowd, so that they would not even have a chance to escape and be alive. Momentarily after those words, the bandit commander himself swung his leg well to give Eldian and Blizz a good kickback. He would never be able to forgive himself for letting himself be beaten by some kids. With a single throw, the hooded man threw several of his knives at the heroes at once with force and fury, making them fly towards Eldian and the heroine at breakneck speed. However, this time too, the boy and the girl were able to dodge the blow. All 4 daggers flew past them while the protagonist, along with Eldian, stared at them in shock. After that, the protagonist of the story decided to quickly and clearly throw her magic sword back so that the bullies would not relax either, but would get what they deserved for their words and actions. In the meantime, Eldian wasn't idle either. He told his opponents with a slight smirk that he was fed up with this spectacle, so he was going to settle everything with just one blow. The boy, full of rage, courage, and fortitude, jumped so high that he appeared above his opponent's head, already about to swing at him with his large and powerful blob of magic. It was only towards the very end that the most important bandit realized that death was coming from behind him. In addition to Eldian's magic, which he felt thanks to the goosebumps on his back, he heard Blizz's dagger whistling towards him. The protagonist's dagger remained levitating in the air, as all of the bandits became possessed by Eldian's magic. They were racked with intense pain, which made them start screaming exhaustedly. The magic continued to work like flames around the people. The leader of the gang could no longer control his body, as he felt the fatigue and the way his strength was being bullied by the magic. His eyes rolled back, which meant that he was about to pass out. Absolutely every one of the bandits who had threatened to massacre the heroine of the story and Eldian lay on the stone road, no longer intending to fight back. Eldian was telling Blizz to get out of here faster while they were unconscious. What the protagonist noticed was that her partner was as calm as ever, even in situations like this when his life was threatened by something. But Blizz wasn't surprised by that because he was the same way in the novel as well. The protagonist also looked at the sleeping bullies as well. She understood that Eldian is serious because he is engaged in a serious matter, that is, the struggle for the throne, but she does not understand what these killers have to do with it. But even more interesting to the heroine was Eldian himself. She looked at him with regret in her eyes, realizing that he had been used to fighting since he was born. Looking carefully at Eldian's face, the girl noticed that it was expressing obvious fatigue from everything that had happened. The boy was breathing heavily and frowning his eyebrows because the whole situation took a lot of strength from him. The main character even realized that it was just as sad for her if she saw her own father or sister sad and tired. But when the girl realized that she was thinking a little wrong, she freaked out, forcing herself to stop thinking about the boy. Blizz continued to stare at her new friend, who for now was standing there doing nothing. She realizes that if she gets too infatuated with him, it will end in a ruined life, because he has to find his happiness with the main character of the novel, Bella. Imagining in her head the plot of the book and imagining Eldian and the main character together in the form of dolls, the girl remembered that in the original Eldian had to struggle with all sorts of difficulties from childhood, because of which he dreamed of soon becoming an heir and living happily with Bella. Blizz thought of it as the right scenario for her and for everyone. While the boy was also thinking about something, she clenched her hands into a fist to force herself to think only about the family she wanted to save. Meanwhile, the boy himself was not just in his own thoughts, but in deep wonder. He couldn't understand why even after the demonic sword his mind remained clear, especially when this girl appeared. Eldian even turned back around, looking at the one he had overcome all the difficulties with the bullies. Blizz stood as well, but the boy looked at her to see if she was of the Labien family, if she possessed specifically the kind of magic that had helped him. The third prince didn't take his eyes off the main character. He watched as Blizz was clearly thinking about something, expressing her wariness and turbulent train of thought with emotion. He couldn't believe that the child Labien was in front of him right now. He even pictured in his mind the adult hand reaching for the young man's palms, thinking that it was likely that the magical powers in this family had begun to be inherited, but it was a miracle that hadn't happened before. The boy imagined a recent event with the heroine, not believing it could be. He became very curious about who this girl really is, and if she is really from Duke Labien's family of precious healers. He also realizes that the blue-haired young lady has other abilities. Looking up at the sky, where for some reason the stars have disappeared, the little boy quickly realized that in his cunning plan to take over the empire, this girl would be even more useful than Helios, who simply gave him a demon sword. But the heroes of the story didn't even realize that someone was already closing in on them. A few uniformed men were on their way to the commotion they caught because of Eldian and Blizz's fight with the bullies, wanting to get to the bottom of things. The main character heard them too. She turned to Eldian excitedly, not addressing him in any way, then said that if they were seen here, they would be in trouble. The wary boy also said they didn't need that. However, the girl was able to calm down for a moment when her new partner looked at her and said that she didn't need to be afraid. This made Blizz's excitement disappear, and she also looked at him with calm eyes. Meanwhile, Eldian himself was adjusting the hood on his head. He wore it so that no one else could recognize him from his appearance. He was also whispering to the protagonist that they should hurry up and go before anyone sees. At this time, the guards, who luckily couldn't find Eldian and Blizz hiding, were walking around the prison holding food for the prisoners. One of them said he heard a fight nearby. The patrolmen continued to talk about some little genius the locals had seen who had solved the whole fight, already approaching one of the prisoners who was sitting on a bed behind bars. The boys in uniform didn't stop talking to each other about how if they were caught, they would be in big trouble right now. With these words, they approached the prisoner's cell, where a dark-haired boy sat sadly. One of the patrolmen was already inserting the key into the lock, about to open the cage to give the prisoner some food. Along the way, he was talking to his friend about some kind of auction that was going to be very important and grand. But all the kindness and goodwill of the boys to each other ended when they approached the cell of a special prisoner and put 2 loaves of bread and a glass of water on the floor, after which they strictly told him that this was the food for the day. The 2 guards then closed the cell after them, leaving the food in it for the prisoner. One of them went away and said about the black-haired guy that he couldn't guess the tastes of high-ranking people, so he should eat this. The guard responded to his words by saying he never thought anyone would need a slave with the ability of shadow art. Of course, he was talking about the dark-haired boy who was sitting in the cell and was also surprised. Meanwhile, the protagonist of the story and Eldian were already walking through the night streets of the city, evading pursuit and pacing through even more unknown alleys where no people even walked or dogs and cats ran. But all the while, Eldian kept his eyes on Blizz, who was at the same time considering everything around him. He thought about how he hadn't paid much attention to it at first, but he still wondered what Duke Helios's daughter had forgotten here. The boy looked at the unsuspecting young lady as if she was his enemy. He guessed that if she had come here at full moon and night, then she too wanted something from the guild as much as he did. But what surprised Eldian even more was her power that he felt when the girl was behind him. He realizes that she is not like the Labian family's usual magical power, about which he feels very strange and unaccustomed. Eldian even remembered the little protagonist when he went to visit her and visited her a few times as she slept in her crib. He realizes that drinking dragon blood should have caused her powers to disappear, but that clearly didn't happen. Blizz herself noticed Eldian's strange behavior, looking at him and thinking that she should hurry. But at this time, the boy was realizing the fact that this child could use the demon sword without any restrictions, and he needed to check it out. When the girl was about to leave the brooding third prince, thinking that he wouldn't notice her missing, she didn't expect the boy to call out to her, asking where she was already going from him. This made the heroine worried. She turned to him and told him that the danger was over and they should probably split up and go their separate ways. But Eldian, taking off his hood, said that it was not so, for he had saved her from those villains. The girl was outraged at the words of the one for whom she had fought her own life. She looked at him indignantly, questioning his words and saying that it was she who had saved him, not he who had saved her. To this, Eldian only laughed. He looked at the heroine of the story with a smile as if she had told him a joke, then said that he was surprised by her confidence, and she was funnier than he had originally thought. It turns out the boy was seriously interested in the girl's abilities. As his magic reignited around his hand, he thought about Blizz and her magic, which now he just had to test if even dragon blood didn't work on her. The strong red magic that was spreading in the air around Eldian made the guy himself look very creepy. His eyes lit up with a bright, blue light when he suddenly asked Blizz if she was afraid of him now. But even that didn't scare the girl. She looked at him as if he was just an ordinary villager without any magic, then asked indignantly why she should be afraid of him at all, like a mouse. Blizz decided to answer like that for the reason that she felt disdain for Eldian. She looked at him as if she was pushing the boy away from her, thinking about the fact that he would ruin her family in the story. Picturing the way the third prince was falling through the abyss of his problems that would cause him to be doomed forever, Blizz realizes that if you help whoever is after your head in the future, you can find a lot of problems. The indignant girl continued to tell her interlocutor otherwise. She grudgingly and angrily told him that she shouldn't be afraid of him since he himself attacked those fools, after which tried to defend himself. She says this in order to protect her family. The protagonist, who actually thought about him often, and as if she followed him everywhere, is well aware that Eldian, who also wants to defend himself, has as much power as she does. Because of this, Blizz made the right decision not to argue with the boy about the power, because it would be very stupid. But when she noticed that Eldian was quiet, she leaned over to take a closer look at his face to see what was wrong with him. It turned out that Eldian was smiling as if he had been complimented. Blizz hadn't expected that, so she continued to stare into the boy's sky-blue eyes and marvel at the easy, kind, childlike smile on his face. The boy's sudden mood swings made the girl a little confused. Her face was dripping with sweat from excitement as she tried to frantically understand what Eldian was trying to tell her with his smile, and whether he understood her words correctly. What surprised the protagonist more, however, was when Eldian didn't just show her his kind, gentle smile, but revealed it even more, showing Blizz his true emotions of happiness. But what makes him smile? That keeps the protagonist on her toes. When the boy began to smile even wider and more beautifully, she became more embarrassed, which was evident in her blue-tinged face. The boy's smile made her not only uncomfortable, but also afraid, which she hadn't felt before. Blizz is embarrassed by the cute, white-haired boy's smile for a reason. She remembers very well that his smile has only been seen by one other person in his life, and that was the main character of the novel, Bella, with whom he was madly in love. But Bella only saw the good side of his smile, which showed his love and worry for the girl. There were times when his smile became sinister and mad when he killed poor people with a sword and his enemies. And now the protagonist of the story realizes that she has become something in between those enemies and poor people and the one and only beloved Bella, whom he loves incredibly. From that, the girl is not comfortable. The thoughts of the protagonist sow and would continue to offer more and more new scenarios for the development of her life if she suddenly did not hear next to her a quiet and calm voice, which asked them to apologize for their anxiety. After the heroine of the story turned around, she saw a girl in front of her holding different ribbons. She politely asked Blizz to buy at least one because she really needed the money. Blizz didn't even understand the girl the first time. She asked her what she meant while Eldian stood there looking at them. The girl replied that she needed money for her little brother who was starving badly right now. To this, the protagonist replied to the girl that she didn't have any money with her right now, asking her to forgive her for that. While the girl was saying this, Eldian was looking at them with such a kind smile, as if he was satisfied with something. It turned out that he was looking at the ribbons in the girl's hands, which were different colors but the same length and width. They were the most common, but it was likely that Eldian was mortified that the girl wanted to sell them for her brother. After not much thought, the boy decided to hold out his palm to the girl, telling her that he would buy one purple ribbon from her. The girl was surprised, but Blizz was even more surprised, for she didn't realize he was so kind. Finishing her purchase, the girl ran back down the street, shouting to the third prince that she was very grateful to him. Blizz and Eldian looked at her as well, while the boy tried to tell her why he even did it. To the protagonist's surprise, suddenly kind to her, Eldian said that this ribbon would be perfect for her image. Blitch even got a little angry, not understanding the real intentions of her colleague. But immediately after these words, the boy for some reason turned to the heroine of the story half sideways, hinting that now he would leave her. But before he did so, he kindly called her a child, as if she were very sweet to him. Turning back around, the boy told Blizz, soldiering on, he looked 5 years older than her, so next time she might not even say it was her. Throwing incomprehensible words in farewell, Eldian looked at the heroine one last time. After that, the boy left the protagonist alone. All she had to do was watch him walk away from her without even saying his name or asking her name, which is very strange. Though Blizz knows who he is anyway. Eldian's behavior puzzled Blizz. She was clearly looking at him with incomprehension, trying to find an answer to why a minute ago he was asking her if she was afraid of him, and now he was acting like a real child. When Eldian left the protagonist, she too decided to return to her palace, where she lived with her father and sister, and over which night darkness also reigned. A maid in one of the rooms was already initiating Helios that the young lady had returned. Duke Helios was not even about to go to bed. He was waiting for his daughter to return, and finally, it happened. He looked at the maid Radietta, who praised him for not even closing his eyes as he continued to wait. The aristocrat decided to confess to the headmaid that he had used a tracking spell to go to her immediately in case of anything. But to this, a chagrined Radietta said to the Duke that he was worrying about her too much. Helios continued talking to the maid, representing the most important information guild building in the Empire. He told Radiette that she most likely went there, but he didn't know what for. When the conversation turned to such a topic, Radietta decided to say everything at once. She informed Helios, who was listening attentively to her, that apparently it was the jeweler Biella who had given her the contact information. The Duke immediately remembered the very elf who came to their palace and hugged the heroine very much, giving her different amulets. He realized that from the very beginning her appearance in the castle was strange, also at Blizz's request. As a result, the Duke turned his head back as if thinking about something. He could not forgive himself that his daughter began to hide something from him, so he told Radietta that if she told him everything, he would listen to her. Helios continued his monologue, telling his subordinate that even if Blizz didn't want to tell him anything, he would still make everything out of whatever she asked of him. The Duke says this because he loves his children madly. Maid Radietta looks at the Duke as if she herself is glad for his worries. She revels in the fact that the Duke is worried about whether or not he has been able to gain his daughter's trust, or whether or not he is not as good a father as he thinks he is. The aristocrat also recalled that very mysterious, scary tree while listening to the maid's words that besides this news, there is news that the news from the temple has already reached the emperor. The Duke checked with the girl and realized that she was talking about the sign of the devil. Because of this, the father of 2 daughters remembered how Eldian visited the protagonist when she was very young. He doesn't believe that the emperor found something strange in her and something that is very important to everyone. Also, when Helios thought about the whole situation, Radietta told him that most likely the prince had visited the Duke's estate, and he knows that Blizz has withstood dragon blood, which is practically omnipotent. Radietta, as if the nobleman's chief mentor and counselor, went on to tell the Duke that most likely Eldian wants to test the young lady's strength with this, and if he manages to find something in her, he will definitely not let go of her. The headmaid, who turned out to be more cunning and clever, warned the Duke, telling him that if the third prince was interested in his daughter, they might have a problem. The Duke got upset, saying that he purposely shore Blizz away from the imperial palace. As the Duke continued to speak to the maid, saying that he would do his best, the protagonist was already in her room and kept her eyes on the purple ribbon that Eldian had given her. Behind the anxious protagonist, who couldn't catch her breath, Cloud, who was also in sweat, appeared. It asked Blizz what it was, while the girl herself couldn't understand how Eldian realized she was a child. The girl clutched her head, telling the Cloud that she had gotten nothing out of the outing as it was, but on top of that she had ruined it to the point where now the third prince could think of her as a tool of his own power. This all irritates the girl. Even when the protagonist slept, hoping to break away from reality and find herself in a pleasant dream, she dreamed of that very last moment from the meeting with Eldian, where he told her that he knew she was really a child. It was the kind of dream that made Blizz wake up in a sweat in the middle of the night. She would suddenly wake up in fear, but when she realized it was just a dream, she would calm down a bit, not wanting to see that blue-eyed blonde man again. Cloud had to watch as the girl held her head from anger and stress, trying as if to switch her mind to normal and healthy dreams, like about her family or her sister, but not about the guy. However, Blizz had no choice but to continue thinking anxiously about Eldian. Rolling over onto her other side, she began to speculate that her appearance had most likely changed when he grabbed her hand, but if that was the case, why was the guy talking to her as if he knew who she was? The thoughts kept the girl awake no longer. She immediately made the decision to get out of bed and do something about it immediately, reassuring herself that it might not be that bad and everything was fine now. Due to the fact that Eldian only came to the girl when she was an infant, and when she was asleep, Blizz figured that he didn't know who she was and therefore she had nothing to worry about. She also realized that he only cared about his lover in the story, Bella, so she needed to be careful until he met her. A couple days later, the protagonist was minding her own business as usual. She was writing something at her desk while a white and fluffy bird was chirping at her window, which was also tapping on her window. Hearing the strange noises, the girl turned around, immediately noticing the one at the window who had brought an important thing for her. She was very much expecting the bird, for it brought her a letter through the air from her favorite person. Looking carefully at the chick, which was sitting on a branch, the protagonist noticed a small purse on its body, which definitely said that it was a long-awaited message from the elfess Biella. Letting the bird into the room, which was immediately interested in the Cloud, the girl immediately began to read the letter with magic, which allows her to communicate with Biella in real time. To us, she read a question from Biella, who was wondering from Blizz how her meeting with the head of the guild had gone. With a magical quill, the girl wrote a reply on a piece of paper, informing Biella that unfortunately the meeting had gone poorly. Thanks to the magic of writing, the elf girl could see in real time on her leaf what the girl had written now. The girl continued to write to Biella, tilting her head to the letter. After much discussion about how she needed these people and how hard the elfess thought it was to meet them, the girl convinced Biella that it was the information guild that she needed. While Cloud and the bird played with each other, Blizz continued to write her reply. She makes these decisions not because of her own choices, but because the plot shouldn't stray too far from the truth, because she needs to know everything up front. The protagonist realizes that in order to become stronger and not disrupt the chronology of events, she must interact mostly with the secondary characters in the novel she has changed into. But also the girl already knows that death awaits them all at the end. Introducing the one who has red, short hair and the one who wears a camouflage suit, the girl said Mole since she chose Ed. She will give her one chance to get it right. Meanwhile, the girl continued her written conversation with Biella. The elven girl was answering her that her plan was good and she hoped she knew what to do. The girl laughed, saying thank you aloud to Biella for the compliment. But the main character's joy disappeared when Biella wrote her a letter saying that there was a rumor that the Information Guild wanted to disappear for a while for some unknown reasons. Cloud and Bird continued to have fun while the protagonist of the story seriously thought about what exactly could have happened, that the Empire's Information Guild would disappear for a while. But it was only when Blizz started thinking about it that she found the answer to her own question. She was surprised when she tried to fit Eldian into the story, who happened to also be in that place at that time and on the full moon. Remembering the way Eldian had defended her from the bullies, the girl realized that according to the story he had now met with the Information Guild, and according to the novel, the guild had strong ties to the royal family. However, when Cloud was already flying away from the annoying bird that was following her around and everything, the heroine of the story only shook her head, telling herself not to fill her head with such nonsense. She replied to Biella by letter that she would find out everything as soon as possible. After that, she gave the leaf to that little bird that kept chasing the cloud. It even hid behind the main character when she said goodbye to Biella's messenger. But, as it turned out, the girl wrote in the letter not the usual words of gratitude. Since she wanted to thank Biella from the very beginning by giving her some clue, she wrote her that near the green vineyard she would find something about the person she was looking for. That was what the pixie read. Blizz was already letting Biella's chick out of the room, opening a window for it. She smiled, remembering that in the original novel the elf was looking for her missing brother, but this clue was the only thing she knew and was in the story. The protagonist remembered her friend's smile, her eyes and lashes, realizing that it was this clue that had been the hope for Biella. She had always helped Blizz, so now the girl wanted to return the favor. Thinking about it, Blizz watched as her bird flew off into the sky, flapping its white wings. She really wants her little clue for Biella to help her find the brother she has been looking for so long. Sometime later, when the girl was doing nothing else, Count Karras burst into her room along with a fair-haired subordinate who immediately asked the heroine how she knew about something. At this time, the protagonist was reading a book in the company of the maid Radietta. Blizz immediately turned her attention to the Count and his friend, hinting that his appearance was too strong and abrupt. Excited about something, the Count came closer to the protagonist and told her that a dragon relic had been found, which is considered a rare item that is used for more than just the usual magical purposes. The protagonist pretended as if she was very happy to hear that she had helped in some way, but it was actually no accident. Even though she laughed in everyone's face, she knew everything from the beginning. The thing is, there was a Labian meeting a couple days ago where the noble showed the map to the Duke and suggested that he take another place where there is a hot spring and a ruby mine. But also present at that meeting was Blizz, smart for her age, who sat on her father's arm and attended the meeting on the recommendation of Count Karras. He was the one who asked the girl what she thought of the business. Taking the opportunity and the fact that she already knew the plot ahead of time, she immediately decided to tell the Count that she had another suggestion for a place to mine and enrich the family's budget. The protagonist decided to show on the map a completely opposite place than the one chosen by the other aristocrat. She pointed out the heart-shaped forest on the map, saying that it was also called the Forest of Black Moss. The girl remembered the story and the main characters in it. She had chosen this place because it was home to an immense amount of dragon relics, which were discovered in the original story by Fabian, one of the main male characters who had been in contact with the heroine. Blizz sat silently at the table and realized that in the story, Fabian discovered the place and became rich, then gifted those lands to the main character. But if the owner of the forest was considered the one who first discovered it, Fabian would have to pay the Labian family to buy it back from them. Meanwhile, Count Karras continued to look at the girl who looked like she knew about this place from the beginning. She was content to let it all happen, which was why the Count assumed that she knew everything about the forest. This won the heart of Count Karras. He looked at the protagonist of the story with such shining eyes, as if he had just become even more proud of her. He admitted that the young lady was very perceptive, but Blizz replied that it was just a coincidence. After that, the girl decided to call Count Karras over to her with that smile that said she wanted to tell him something. The aristocrat turned to Blizz with curiosity and hurried over to her. When the Count came closer to the girl and bent down to hear her words, she whispered that she had a lot more to say, only if they would give her some personal minds. So far, the Count didn't understand anything. He raised his head and looked at the protagonist again, telling her that if it was about money, she could just ask the Duke for it, and there would be no problem. But Kara still asked the girl if there was something she was keeping secret. In response, the protagonist only remained silent, a little embarrassed by the awkward question. Count Karras noticed this and simply said in a whisper that he understood the answer to his question. In fact, the protagonist is well aware of the fact that her dad and the Labien family in general is very wealthy, as seen by the luxurious houses, status, and many other things that make the family rich. However, thanks to the fact that the girl knows the whole plot ahead of time, she realizes that sooner or later they will become poor, and then she will have to defend her family's honor. Blizz realizes that this is the kind of case she must prepare herself for. To the little girl's surprise, Count Karas agrees to her terms. When Blizz looked at him in surprise, he said that he would only agree to these terms if the protagonist herself did not leave for a man from another family. Blizz was a little confused by the Count's words. She questioned him about it, but he only told her that everything she knew should not go beyond the Duchy of Labien, the home of the little girl. Count Karas also gave the protagonist sudden juxtapositions concerning her not contacting the Emperor's family, and even more so staying away from the Crown Prince. Blizz asks him what he means. Turns out Count Karas was leading his conversation to the protagonist staying in that castle permanently for safety reasons. He even said that he wouldn't mind if the heroine's husband lived here with her. In the end, the girl was left to escort the Count out, not understanding what he wanted to tell her about her husband, since she was only 7 years old now. Blizz waved goodbye while Karas couldn't help but gag. After all the extra people had left, the girl turned to Radietta, confessing that she didn't even want to go to a strange family and she didn't understand why the Count had brought it up. To this, Radietta calmly replied that there were reasons for this behavior of Count Karas. The heroine immediately wondered what those reasons were and what she meant. Radietta realized that now the little girl would not get away from her so easily. She hesitated whether to tell Blizz this or not, so she started by saying that the Emperor wanted to arrange something very soon. Already imagining the most fabulous hall with white marble, the heroine listened to Radietta's words that the Emperor was going to organize a banquet on the occasion of the young lady's birthday, but not only that, it would be held in the main hall of the Imperial Palace. Such news made the protagonist's jaw drop. She was pleasantly surprised because this celebration would be the best chance to get the bright emotions and funny memories she was missing. After the maid left, having notified the heroine of the holiday, the girl began to read books. She picked up one that talked about the embodiment of mana and how its appearance depended on the owner. She held up a seemingly old book with a brown cover, recognizing something that only the owner could see, and talked to the embodiment of his magic, which in Blizz's case was a cloud. But that didn't surprise the girl much. This information seemed boring to her, which was evident in her eyes. She realizes that in all the books write literally the same thing. The girl continued to read the book and grudgingly said she wanted to know more about the cloud and what it was, but there was too little information. Meanwhile, the cloud was flying near her. A cute cloud, like a flying cotton candy, flew up to the main character and then, touching her face, asked if it was time to sleep. The heroine replied that she would go to bed later, as she had a lot of things to do. After that, the pink cloud continued to fly around the main character and over her head, cheerfully saying that Blizz was very busy today. This lifted the girl's spirits, and she even wanted to confess to her friend why this was so. But the girl was interrupted by Radietta, who entered the girl's room and asked her if she was awake yet. Blizz called out to Radietta, showing her that she was very much pleased to see her. The kind and affectionate maid came closer to the girl. She looked at her, telling her that the Duke was ready for the lesson that was about to be taught. Most likely the girl would be taught something by her father himself this day. Blizz happily replied to the maid that she was ready to learn new information and knowledge, because this day she would be taught by her father, who had specially prepared a secret lesson for her. In fact, the girl asked her father to give her secret lessons, even when she learned to speak. She constantly asked him to do this, even when he was working at the desk. All this the protagonist does in order to prepare her family financially, physically, fully protecting them from threats, which she learns about due to the fact that she already knows the entire novel ahead of time. The girl remembers herself as an infant and realizes that now the Labien family is more or less protected and strong, but that doesn't mean that it won't be like that in the future. That's what worries little Blizz. Having gained motivation, the girl realizes that she needs more than just secret lessons, cunning, intelligence, lots of money or mines. First and foremost, she needs the strength to do all of these things. Blizz quietly led the way to her daddy's room, or rather his study, thinking about the fact that she had chosen as her mentor someone who would never leave her in a difficult moment, and someone who loved her more than anything else in the world with incredible strength. The girl chose her father as an additional teacher for the secret lessons, through which she would be able to learn as much new knowledge as she would need to protect her family. Helios greeted his daughter wearing clear vision goggles. The first thing Blizz did when she got close to her daddy was to ask him if he was tired, as he had been having a busy few days lately. The Duke replied that he wasn't tired at all, as the girl had assumed. The father even lifted his daughter in his arms, causing Blizz to immediately burst into laughter. The girl laughingly told her father that she thought that at such an early time he would not wake up at all and forget about the lesson. But the main character still decided to be serious. She removed the emotion of joy from her face, telling her dad that from now on she would be as serious as he was. Helios only agreed with her words. When her father placed his daughter on his lap and she calmed down, the first thing he decided to do was ask her if anything had changed since receiving the mana ore, that is, that magical dagger. Remembering what it looked like, the girl listened to her father, who told her that she needed this item to get to know her energy better. The girl realized that, as the cloud told her, something new was about to be revealed. The protagonist also remembered the fact that there are different powers in the Empire, and mana powers, not only magic, but also the powers of the imperial family and the 4 duchies. The girl listened to her father and carefully memorized that her mana absorbs everything, from the dragon blood of the sailor family, healing magic, to the poison of the Duchy of Ed. But there is also another power that the girl learns about now, representing a nameless servant girl. She realizes that this power is also called shadow art, which even sounds mystical. Blizz continued to listen to her father as he told her that usually the appearance of mana depends on the power used. Such words made the girl immediately remember the fateful moment with Eldian, who discovered her magic. The girl decided to confess to her dad that she could see something that looked like the embodiment of the mana he was talking about, but she didn't know if it was from ore. Helios was surprised at his daughter's words. The main character of the story smiled as if she had become comfortable with the question. She realized that when Daddy knows about the existence of the cloud, she herself will be easier, and from her father will not have to hide something or someone. But because of this, the girl remembered a moment from the past. The thing is that when she first approached him and said that she wanted secret lessons, Helios asked her if her mana had no incarnation. It was only because of that thought that the girl seriously thought about it, not understanding why her father had asked her about it then. She assumes that the Duke already knew about something then, but she doesn't suspect that her dad is trying to get through to her now. Blizz noticed that her father's hand suddenly began to emit a bright blue-white light. Helios told her that he was about to let her see mana, and she would have to tell him what she was seeing. The girl agreed with every word her daddy said. The girl began to carefully observe her father's mana, which glowed beautifully and brightly in his hand. It mesmerized the girl, because of which Na could not take her eyes off it. After she realized everything, Blizz looked at her father and told him that his mana had a silver-blue hue and was also very shiny, like silver glitter. Her daughter's words surprised Duke Helios so much that he looked at her with great amazement. The girl went on to tell him that his mana had a bright white light, indicating its freezing effect, but the Duke couldn't understand how she already knew all this. The daughter and father continued to hold the lesson, talking about how most likely everyone's mana is different, because each person can be completely different in both soul and appearance, which is not surprising and even unique. But when her father's mood took a sharp turn for the worse, Blizz became wary. She asked him what was wrong, but Helios remained silent, as if he was clearly worried about something to the point where everything around him seemed to go dark. Imagining a hand holding a butterfly with a snake crawling beside it, Helios explained his worries to his daughter, saying that there were very few people in the world who could see mana, even in as much detail as Blizz. The girl was even more surprised by her father's words that it was quite possible that she was a special girl. The heroine of the story continued to remain silent, listening to her dad's every word and memorizing everything. The ever-surprised heroine was also a little puzzled and surprised by these words. She said to her daddy with incomprehension, how could it be if he also sees mana and therefore is as rare a person as she is? Helios decided to tweak his words a bit. He told his daughter that he couldn't see mana, but he could see a trace of it. At this time, he looked at the stacks of papers he had on his desk. As the cloud of the protagonist flew by her side, the girl's father replied that he could distinguish manna by its color, but he would never understand its form as the heroine does. The girl realized that she was special even in that, but the father's worries overrode the joy for his daughter being such a rare possessor of magical abilities. He touched her cheek, offering to keep it all a secret for her own good. Helios explained his decision by saying that it might attract pesky people who might want to use the girl's abilities for their own personal gain. Blizz agreed to her father's words, about to say something else. Looking at her father with the kindest eyes, the heroine asked him if it was true that the emperor himself was organizing a banquet in his castle in honor of her birthday. The girl still wonders about it. To this, the duke seemed to react a little disapprovingly. He averted his head and his gaze to the side, as if it was a problem or something suspicious to him. But he told his daughter the truth, admitting that it was just the way it was. It made the little girl anxious, too. She watched her father start to get angry when he realized and told her. He said even the emperor was now interested in her, but he didn't fully understand why. Helios even remembered a recent meeting with him, when he sat right in front of the emperor. He apologized to the heroine of the story, remembering the fact that back then he couldn't refuse the emperor, who insisted on holding a feast. The Duke of the Labienne family confessed to his daughter that for some reason the entire imperial family was officially thanking him for his hard work. These words also alerted little Blizz, for something was not right here. The cloud continued to fly in the Duke's office, while he himself told his daughter that he sincerely hoped that everything would go well. Blizz admitted that she was now worried about them finding out about her mana and abilities. But Helios quickly reassures his daughter, saying that everything will be fine and no one will know about it if she tells them about it. This is what the protagonist of the story hopes for. The Duke explained his words by the fact that people themselves will not be able to find out about such abilities, and ordinary commoners do not even know what she looks like. Blizz listened attentively to her father, who was more worried about her than herself. The protagonist seriously thought about it. On the one hand, she felt much better from her father's words, but she cannot calm her feeling, as if she is sad for the fact that meeting with Eldian seems very strange and suspicious to her. But as calm as the girl was, she didn't know that Helios was actually even more worried about her. There was obvious worry on his face, and he was thinking that things were much more serious than he had realized. By this point, the lesson had come to an end. Blizz got off her father's lap while he told her that that was it for today, and there was nothing they could do for today. But the heroine was not discouraged. Blizz had even more motivation than she had before. To reassure her dad, she showed him her courage and fortitude by telling him that she would keep herself so quiet that no one would know anything about her, and Helios shouldn't worry so much. The Duke looked out the window with a slight sadness, telling the girl that it would be difficult since the banquet was being held in honor of her birthday. But the heroine continued to insist on his own, he should just believe her, and then Helios calmed down. After the daughter left, the Duke took a single piece of paper in his hands. He thought about the fact that his daughter is highly unique, just as unique as her eyes that clearly see magic. He realizes that if the imperial family found out about this, it would be very bad for her. Because of this whole situation, Helios couldn't help but think of the man who gave him his daughter. He remembered his dead-beloved Shesa, looking at the papers and thinking that he loved her very much and was ready to do anything for the sake of his daughter. Meanwhile, the girl had already gone back to her room, remembering the first time she told her daddy that she wanted no one but the two of them to know about the secret lessons. She remembers seeing on the red couch when she was just a little girl, trying to tell her daddy that it was supposed to be secret. A perplexed Helios asked her if even Helena shouldn't know about it. Blizz remembers then asking her daddy if Helena would be upset if she knew that her daddy was teaching her something secret. To this, the calm Duke replied that this was certainly not the case, and her sister would not be offended at all. At that moment, the protagonist of the story swore to her daddy that she would become much stronger than she is now, so that she could protect her daddy and sister later. At the time, it humbled the serious head of the family and the girl's father. Helios couldn't help but forget those moments from the past. Thanks to them, he realized that Blizz was a special girl, and somewhere she even repeated the character of her mother, who was no longer there. The Duke looked out the window and realized that her efforts were admirable. However, at the same time, the Duke smilingly talks to himself, asking why his daughter is in such despair if she can at any time rely on him, especially at such a young age. After a while, the girl was in a completely different room. She was wearing a new outfit, which she looked at in the mirror in surprise while the maid told her to turn around. When the girl did so, she was immediately complimented, saying that the dress suited her very well. Blizz laughed and began to twirl even more in front of the mirror. With a good mood, the girl tried on various outfits, in one of which in the future will have to go to the castle of the emperor at a banquet in honor of her birthday. But after a while, when trying on outfits dragged on for long hours, the girl was already running around the room with discontent and shouted to everyone that she was about to die from how difficult the choice of dress was. The girl was indeed offered a lot of options that differed not only in color, but also in style, necklines, and fabrics, making it incredibly difficult for Blizz to choose one. Due to the stress, the main character of the story collapsed on the couch, telling everyone that she had had enough of everything. The designer and the maid Radietta, who were standing nearby, asked the girl if she was tired by any chance. Much to the girl's dismay, the designer kept chattering not only about dresses, but also about jewelry and all sorts of ribbons, which really tired the protagonist, who was at her limit with anger. But no matter how tired she was, Blizz still realized that it was all for the banquet at the Emperor's castle, at which she would be the main one. Because of that, she kept talking to the designer about the details, thinking about the feast taking place in a few days. The girl was even sometimes glad that the designer understood her request and did what she truly liked. The girl understands that, as the guest of honor, she should be busy preparing for the party. Days went by as it was still bright and clear outside of Labienne's palace. Blizz was in the castle pondering if she would meet a real princess if her birthday party was held in the Emperor's castle. Blizz thought she would never see the one who supposedly saved her from the bullies of the full moon again. And because of this, while reading in Radietta's company, she decided to ask the maid what kind of man Prince Eldian was. The maid, however, was in no hurry to answer the heroine's question at once. She paused her forking, excitedly asking the girl why she was suddenly asking about him. The girl only scratched her head in response, telling Radietta that since she was going to spend her birthday in the Emperor's company, she would like to know something about the prince so that she would not be ashamed of him later. As she continued embroidering, Radietta told the little girl that not much was known about the third imperial prince, but everyone knew him as a brief and ambassadorial person in the Riaz family. Blizz realized that all of the maid's words did not fit in any way with the Eldian she had encountered when she first met him. She remembered his arrogance and strangeness, realizing that no one could be taken at his word. But it turned out the maid had not told her everything about him. As she continued to embroider, she confided to the girl that there were rumors that he was very smart and clever. Blizz naively asked Radietta if it was true. The maid kept talking while the protagonist pictured in her mind a beautiful imperial crown, listening to Radietta's words that Prince Risol and Prince Eldian were the only candidates for the throne, so it was likely that they were constantly being tested in the castle. The maid then looked at the girl's face, asking her if it was fashionable to call this man meek and obedient if he survived the struggle for the throne with minimal losses. Blizz, with the book in her hands, continued to listen to Radietta's words, saying that already says a lot about Prince Eldian. At that moment, Blizz realized that the third prince was being inconspicuous on purpose to make the plan work. The protagonist realized that Eldian wanted to confuse everyone, but when they first met, he told her that he was not one to be feared. The maiden imagined that the prince himself would have to cope alone with an imperial castle that had turned against him. But Radietta's words brought the girl back to reality from her thoughts. She rose from her seat, telling her she was glad that the emperor was treating her well, but at the same time it made her anxious. Putting all the sewing supplies on the table, Radietta lifted the worried girl into her arms while she asked her if she was afraid something would happen to her. Radietta replied that she was, since they were powerless in the Emperor's palace. At that moment, the protagonist realized one important fact. She realized that everyone in Labienne could defend her, but when she appeared in the Emperor's castle, no one else would be able to protect her. The heroine realized that almost everyone is alarmed because of this, Even though it's a direct danger, the girl feels that she is truly important to everyone in the house. This soothes the protagonist's soul. Radietta and Blizz were hugging each other sweetly. The maid encouraged the girl, telling her that she is smarter and wiser than others, so no one can fool her. Blee realized that she was grateful to everyone for such support. The maid continued to look at the girl with her kind eyes. She reassured her with words, telling her that she would not be alone at that banquet, but would have support in the form of her father and sister. Her whole family will be there. Radietta's sincere words finally calmed the protagonist, who was also worried about him. She realized that the word family now sounded different to her, as if it was now filled with new colors and joy. The protagonist looked at her little hands, realizing that finally family was as precious to her as it was to others, something she could only dream of in her previous lives. Blizz was very pleased, so she continued to cuddle with Radietta as if she were already her own. But suddenly her attention was drawn to a ball of thread in the basket, which was purple in color. It was only because of the color of the ball of thread that the girl remembered Eldian. He recently gave her a ribbon of exactly the same color, and although the heroine initially reacted negatively to it, but now she is very pleased for her. She can't stop thinking about the prince. She put the puzzles together and realized that he probably doesn't understand the meaning of the word family either, because he himself fought with her against the bullies his brother sent him. The girl remembered that he was like her, only in a previous life. The girl remembered the face of her new acquaintance and realized that perhaps that was why it bothered her so much that Eldian's behavior and character was not childlike either. But for the umpteenth time, Blizz told herself not to think about him, as it was not important to her. The girl even began to think about whether she could make Prince Eldian happy the way Bella would do instead of her soon. But when the girl realized that she was allowing herself to think strange thoughts, she ordered herself to stop doing so immediately. With thoughts of not forgetting her purpose, the girl raised her head to Radietta and told her sincerely that she would make her family happy, no matter what it cost her or what she had to sacrifice. The girl, who was clearly full of motivation and strength, asked the surprised maid if she could do it. The maid took her time to answer, marveling at the little girl's resilience. The sincerity and kindness of the protagonist only made Radietta smile widely. She gave the girl her own smile, in which there was joy and pride for the one she saw in front of her. Outside the window the sky was clear, which only embellished the magical conversation between the maid and the protagonist. The castle was filled with warmth and kindness, and it was all thanks to Blizz. Radietta told her that of course she could do whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, absolutely no other place was as peaceful and joyful as Labian Castle. The first prince, Rhysal, was rushing to his boss, worried about it. He is surprised that the imperial family has decided to throw a banquet in honor of a young lady who hasn't even made her debut. Rhysal is even more horrified by what the rest of the nobility will think when they see a girl like the protagonist in the imperial palace itself, who is clearly needed by the highest people in power for something. Already envisioning an adult protagonist who will be dressed in the most gorgeous outfit of them all that exists in the world, the first prince has suggested that she may well be chosen as the new candidate for heir to the imperial throne, which is crazy for everyone. But Rhysal still doesn't understand why everyone is personally accompanying this child. He thought back to his conversation with Helios at the last banquet and realized that he wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone, showing the aristocrats that the Duke rejects him. Rhysal realizes that this is just outrageous because he is the first pint-sized dragon blood, and no one else has the right to humiliate him the way Helios did. Still, Rhysal, as a player who isn't going to give up on his brother so easily, knows one way in which he can deftly eliminate the competition. He thought of Duke Ed's poison, realizing that he could easily poison Helios, who is inconveniencing him. It was with such a request that the first prince of the imperial family appeared before Duke Henry, who was sitting in his chair in his study as usual and smiling inexplicably over something. Placing his hands on the table, Rhysal shouted the Duke's name, hinting that what he was about to tell him was incredibly important.